Well, hello, everyone. It's nice to see you all. Let me just make sure we're doing the sound check. Can those of you that are a little bit east of us hear us?
Loud and clear.
Okay, there we go. And Jessica?
Yeah.
Great, we can hear you as well. So
Good.
good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all again. And Julie, it's great to see you in person. Woohoo! Anyways, I guess you all remember I'm Steve Toller, and it's been a privilege to serve you in the city in this project. I think everybody pretty much knows each other at this point, right? So we don't have to do all the introduction stuff. I do want to introduce you, however, or reintroduce you to Sam Lieberman, which you all met last time and last few times or so, but maybe a face that you have not seen before is Jessica Oliphant. Jessica is one of our senior consultants. She's got great experience in working in budget offices for large cities and has been working with us for the last year and a half or so right now, Jessica, something like that. So yeah, and so Jessica's been behind the scenes in most cases on this, and she's going to be the one that drives our fiscal model tonight as we bring that up, and if we need that as part of the conversation tonight to be able to help you with that. So anyways, it's great to be with you all tonight, and I am able to hear a little bit better than I was the last time. So thank you for your grace last meeting that we had. So everything is going well there. So as we start tonight, we're going to dive in hard to the budget strategies and have a conversation around that. Did you all get it was kind of an excerpt from the slide deck that I sent out yesterday in a PDF form. And I hope that you had an opportunity to see that and read that. And I just want to touch on a couple of highlights, and then we want to spend most of our time getting into some of the strategies. So you will remember from that that one slide that we had, and I think Sam has it up. Look at that. See, Sam was just like guessing what I'm going to say of our little roadmap. And we're going to be we're on August 10th, of course. And to the extent that there's some coalescence and consensus around the different strategies to be pursued tonight, and kind of your prioritization, sequencing, and or timing recommendations that you have there, as well as reflections of the reserve policy. We will see whether or not we need the August 24th meeting based on where we go through tonight. So and with that, I just want to, again, remind us of the issue that we're trying to solve here, of course, and you all have seen this. We're not going to belabor this point, but it basically shows that there's a gap, and you all did your homework, and we appreciate you getting the workbooks back to us with the strategies on it. I do want to reemphasize one point, though, is that what we have been attempting to do thus far is to address the ongoing potential operating gap that exists based on the financial forecast. That does not include any set aside for dealing with some of the underfunded and or unfunded capital projects. And depending on the extent of the strategies that are implemented and the extent of other changes that may occur as in future years, whether it's new development, whether it's some changes in terms of revenue sources that the city is able to enjoy, that will need to be addressed, and there might be the ability to be able to fund some of those, and we'll talk about that tonight as we kind of go through this, and we can even model some of what that might look like. So I think when it comes to this framework, again, I'm not going to belabor that. I sent this out to you yesterday, hoping you had a chance to at least take a fresh look at it. It's a little bit of a different graphic representation, but it's the same information that was in the report about looking at it in terms of what is the fiscal impact compared to then the difficulty of implementation that will help lead to evaluating the strategies. And I'm guessing dollars to donuts that you all took that into consideration as you went through the workbook and provided your insights in terms of the various strategies. One of the points I want to call up, and Sam, if you go to the next slide, it's this, go ahead and click one more, is that concept of all those different factors to consider, the 5 different factors that range from community values to, the technical operational aspects and, the impact that it has on service delivery as well as the city organization, which is something that Scott here is, I'm sure, very concerned about as well. But there's also this impact of timing. And I did want to pull out one of the slides just to show that tonight, which is just that concept that as we think about the timing and the sequencing of these different items, I think that there's some things that we have to take into consideration. Go ahead, Sam, go to that next one, which is, really understanding that to get an item on a ballot is going to require, some time to be able to do that and get it, positioned in a way that will make sense. I think that, sometimes what it also impacts timing in our experience in working with other agencies is just at least an understanding, and we don't know what that looks like, of course, anywhere in the future, but timing of perhaps has some other measures that may on the ballot, but also, the implementation requirements that are within the city's control. In other words, to get all the forms and, revenue things, or to be able to implement the expenditure reductions on a timely basis, that it might be within the city's control, but those things that might also have an impact on the business community needs to be thought about as well. For example, utility tax, which you all provided, your feedback on, requires the city to work with the business community, in this case, the utility providers, as the example, to make sure that they're able to start, collecting the any of the utility tax that might be levied upon them for the services that they provide in the community. So those are just all some things that impact timing. And again, you all had a chance to look at those slides, and we're going to get into the budget strategies, but are there any questions about kind of that framework and your thoughts in terms of, how you applied that? You don't have to necessarily respond on that question, but I'm just wondering if there's any either questions or other comments that you have on the framework of considering the strategies before we then just dive right into what we heard from you. Nothing? Use the microphone. Even though I can hear you great.
Testing. Hi. Question about process. Since we have all these budget strategy items, could we also, before we dive into that, share any ideas that people may have, so that we have in back of the mind? Not only do we have these that we reviewed already, here's some other ideas to kind of percolate in our head, so that when we review all the strategy, we can also consider the impact of these new ideas.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Owen. And what our thoughts were on that was that we can go through the response that we got from all of you on the various budget strategies that were on the list. And then some of you actually filled in some additional items, and we'll talk and we'll reflect about what we heard from some folks about that. But if there's anything else that might come up, we were thinking about addressing that as after we've reviewed that. Would that be acceptable to you, or do you want to
Just
talk
a question
about
for everyone. I don't have any new ideas. I have some questions later on, but just wanted to know if there's any bright ideas that we hadn't thought about before. Maybe that might be something that kind of introduced to the team here.
Yeah. And do we want to do that before or after we
that
look at the
share?
responses that you gave on the existing strategies? Anybody have a strong opinion on that timing? Go ahead, Don.
Well, Paul Stickney submitted quite a bit of information about a different strategy. And should we talk about that concept before or after we talk about all these revenue sources?
What does the rest of the team want to, how do you want to approach that?
I feel that that's a distraction from our task at hand.
Okay. Christine?
I honestly want to be able to talk about some of these ideas, because I think even going through some of the recommended options, there was a little bit of adjustment I was wondering about if that's possible. So
Okay.
I do want to talk about Paul's ideas, as well as whatever new ideas might be whenever is appropriate in the agenda, please.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we don't want to ignore it for sure. The question is just, do we talk about it first or do we talk about it after we go through the existing strategies that you reflected upon and then address any additional ones that may be worthy of consideration? And as we go through this, we're not expecting that, we're, okay, first item that was on the list was, whatever, yes or no. I mean, that's not what we'll do. We just want to be able to share what the collective response were from all of you so that it can inform your overall conversation. So, Debbie?
I guess this is on. I'd really like to go through the exercise. Personally, I found, actually, I agree with Nancy that Paul's comments, while they're valid and important and we should consider them, are really a distraction and change the whole focus of what we're talking about.
Okay. And we could look at some of those ideas that had come up in terms of just what is at the core of that, it's development, it's providing housing, those types of things. We can talk through those clearly as part of our dialogue, right? But we want to reflect on if I could suggest, and unless I hear a visceral reaction to it, let's go through and review. Survey says, we'll go through that first, and then let's capture some other ideas that you all have thought about that perhaps maybe, after you submit, it's like, oh, we should have said this, or we will also then address any of the other testimony that has come in, like the one from Mr. Stickney and others. Does that make sense? Good. All right. So let's jump to that. And I'm going to ask my esteemed colleague, Sam, to kind of lead us through and review kind of what y'all had sent to him. So go ahead, Sam.
Thanks, Steve, and thank you all for providing your responses to me by the 8th. That was very helpful for us to pull this together so quickly for you all. Before I get into it, I want to preview for you what you'll see. We identified the average priority score, right? You all identified a 0, 1, 2, or 3 for each of the strategies. And so there is an average score for each of the priorities, and we're going to talk about the strategies in order of average priority score from highest to lowest. So those where, there was most agreement to pursue it to the least if we need to when we get down that far. You will see sort of a grouping of strategies and their average rating, and then we'll talk about each of them individually. And when we get into the individual strategies, we have included all of your individual ratings for those strategies. And if anybody provided a comment or a note for those strategies, those will also be on the screen and can be a part of this discussion. So without further ado, those that collectively received a rating above 2 include the utility tax, and I'll pause here for a second. We took, we know we had 3 utility tax options. We took your maximum score for one of those 3 options to come up with the average. So what we're saying here is there is a relative agreement that a utility tax might be something to pursue. Now, there's going to be discussion, I think, at what level, and you'll see that gradation when we go to that slide. But the highest rating for a budget strategy among the options provided was the utility tax, then the Metropolitan Park District, traffic enforcement technology, and lastly, the transportation benefit district at the council-manic level, less than $50. So let's look at the individual ratings for all 3 options of the utility tax, what the maximum rating for each of them is, and then you'll also see on this slide the comments. Hopefully you can read them. And so again, to orient you in this first column, that was the 6% at $6.6 million utility tax option, our $11 million option. Steve, I think you want to touch on our third option here for a moment.
Yeah, I have a mea culpa on the third one. The report, when you look at the details of what comprised the $11.7 million, It was a 6% tax on electric, gas, telecom, and cable. It was a 7% rate on water, sewer, storm, and solid waste. I unfortunately had included in the spreadsheet 10%. And so I apologize for that. And as we talk through this, if there's some, difference of opinion or whatnot that anybody individually wants to share. And I don't know to what extent that 10% was the thing that kind of, gave you the shock and awe, but I apologize for that error. And I noticed that as we got the responses back yesterday, and I'm like, so I apologize for that. So anyways, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And then the final column here is again that maximum rating for any of the utility tax options. And so you can see here that, there was consensus to pursue this option either, as a priority or as a secondary priority. Now, clearly I think we'll have some discussion here about what level that might look like. I'll give you some time. I won't read to you the comments that your fellow task force members provided when thinking about these options. But just to note that in the parenthetical at the end, those are the initials of the person that provided the comments. And so, I think really for Steve and I and Jessica, it would appear as though there is some consensus in this group to pursue a utility tax as an option. And the question that we'll have to coalesce around is at what level, because that's where we have some difference of opinion, right, in what we're seeing here on our table. I think for me, I would open it up to the floor. When you all see this, what do you reflect on? And you can see where your colleagues are and what kind of discussion might you want to have with each other to come up with a consensus rate for utility tax, if that's an option that you would recommend Scott to recommend to council.
Any reflection? Don, go ahead. And then John.
Yes, thank you. I just have a question for Scott about stormwater. We've increased the stormwater fees quite a bit. So could that be separated away from the rest if we put a 6% utility tax? Don't do it in addition on stormwater?
Thank you, Don. That's a consideration for council. Obviously, I mean, each of the utilities would be a separate consideration, if you will, when they get to that point.
John, go ahead.
So I went with the 6.6, but after thinking about it a bit, and Richard had suggested this the last meeting, you go with 3%. And then reassess going forward, because I don't think the implementation was scheduled until 28 or 27. So council would have a couple years to look at what revenues are looking like, what expenses are looking like. And overall came in short of the $18 million gap. But knowing that this is going to get revisited every year, there's room for adjustment in the future. So my strategy, I guess, was stay on the low side, even though utility tax has probably got to be part of the mix.
Yeah, and that's, part of the nuance of implementation of this, and also just kind of what your consensus is, do you go, you put the pedal to the metal? Do you put the, all jets at full speed, or do you, implement it as a ratable, type of an issue? And I think that, agencies and city councils need to think about that in terms of, do they just go for it all? Or do they do a 3% and then graduate to 4%, graduate to 6% based on what the forecast is showing? So there are some different options clearly as a result of that. So Michael and then Julie.
Yeah, I guess part of what I was doing there is I thought, well, if we're going to go for it, we're going to go for it, because if not, it's got to come from someplace else. And so I think of all we're doing here is a forced distribution, right? We have to choose something. And if it's not this, then I wasn't, kind of just by this voting alone kind of shows value and priority in and of itself. Because although I hear you, John, it's just that, wow, I couldn't figure out then where else is that going to come from? And I also think that I didn't get the sense that we have time on our side. I mean, it's 2023. Before you know it, kids will be out of my kids will be out of college, and I'll be old, and they're like, where did these years go? And geez, I also in private industry know how hard these things are to put in place. And man, I wish you could turn on a dime to do that. Personally, I don't know how hard it is for cities to do that, honestly. But what y'all are saying makes it sound like it's not the easiest thing in the world. So
Yeah, thank
I
you
yield.
for your perspective on that, Michael. Julie, go ahead.
Those were my sentiments as well. To me, I don't know how hard it is to implement, although I did read that in the comments. And I felt like without choosing something like this, it was going to be hard to make it to even to some level of trying to get to that revenue. And so my comment was, well, first of all, I looked in, I mean, since Sammamish has 0, it feels like there's some room to put in something, but I wasn't able to model in or figure out, if you start with, I started with the 6.6 just because not going, going for it at start, then the city could have time to model in adding others and testing the sensitivity of that. So that's, yeah, that's kind of my thinking on that.
Okay. Yeah, Christine?
I agree with Julie and with, we need to start somewhere. And as you can see on the chart, I'm a tweener. I'm kind of in between both. So I thought I'd explain why that is. In our last meeting, Parks talked a lot about illegal dumping, and I really took that to heart. And so you see in my comments on the right is there a possibility to add to 6.6 million the added water, stormwater, and sewer, but keeping waste out of it just for the sensitivity that I heard before. Otherwise, I can be convinced to go higher.
So let me just understand that, Christine, from what you just said there. It would be
The electric, gas.
focus on 6.6 million,
Mhm.
but incorporate water, sewer, and stormwater. So in other words, that would be more like, let's just giggles and kicks, about 3% roughly.
Right, like a
across the
little bit more than 6.6, but not all the way to 11.
Got it. Okay, so you would not implement the 6% tax that was being done here. It would be something less to try to get somewhere between the tweener, between 6 and 11. There.
Yeah, and it may be, given how this whole structure works, that's not allowable, but I just wanted to raise it based on sensitivity of illegal dumping mentioned
Yeah,
in the last
yeah. I
meeting.
think for purposes, again, just looking at this again, stripping out solid waste for a minute, which is about just shy of about $1 million. It was $800,000 as part of that 11 million. So let's just say 10 million, right? If you excluded solid waste at a 6% level, and if you went down from there, it's, well, the math gets a little bit messy, but
Well, and if there were those numbers, I'm sorry, I missed the detail on that. I wasn't sure how much each cost, but yeah, thank you.
okay, yeah. Yeah, Larry.
No, go ahead. I'll back up a little bit here. Going back over your one consideration was timing. And I was trying to wrap my mind around where it goes into the city council through the staff, where some of the other ones could come immediately. So would a comprehensive picture have some adoptions of ones that are almost immediate and then one that's a little later on to raise funds?
Yeah, and I think as we then look at all the different strategies and where your perspectives are and consensus are, then we'll talk about kind of that sequencing or the prioritization. We don't necessarily have to have you all, come up with this consensus opinion that it has to be in 2026 for this, 27, 28. But I think that timing of, now, a little later, and then down the road, I mean, that sense I think will be helpful as part of this. And that's kind of where you're getting at, right, Larry? Okay, good. Nancy and or Owen, I'm sorry.
I agree with most of the comments that have come forward. A lot of people don't like utility tax because they feel they're regressive. But if you think about it, the more resources you use, the more you're going to be taxed. And so it is not, if it makes you feel better, I think that should make everybody feel better. So the more power you use, the more you're going to be taxed. The other point I want to make is that it's not very much, 6% on your utility bill. So it's not going to prevent illegal dumping if you hold it back. Because if the tax on your $100 garbage bill is 6%, are you not going to dump? I mean, let's collect the solid waste too, because this is legitimate utility that we provide, and I think it should be taxed. I'm not sure about stormwater, since we have, as John points out, we have increased those fees recently. Maybe that would be too painful, but I think the sooner we can get after it, the better.
Yeah, I pulled up I'm not sure what you get for the stormwater I see, but it looks like we've got a notice that now it's $420 roughly per year. And that, I guess I wouldn't tax that either. I wouldn't tax that as a utility tax. I'm not sure that anybody's really, I know the city's running around and I suppose cleaning storm drains and stuff like that, but to add a utility tax for that seems, it doesn't seem right. And I still say we shouldn't tax garbage either, but that's what I think. Yeah, if we do that at the rates this acquire at 3%, I think be okay.
Got it. Okay, great. Debbie, were you?
Yeah, I was
Sorry,
just.
Ellen,
Oh,
I'll
go
let you
ahead.
do your thumb. Rock, paper, scissors, go.
For my selection, I was looking at the first column, the 6%, because I was looking at my overall selection. But certainly we need to do something here, since in terms of the dollar impact, it will get us there. And without this, we may not get there as a whole. So when I put down 0 for the columns 2 and 3, this is my first pass at it. Certainly, if this group determines that, well, we should go, let's say, the middle column, I'm up for that. That means I can eliminate some of the other items that I had put down. So on the balance, that will work out. So that's just my reasoning behind my selection there. In terms of, let's see. Someone mentioned about looking at it, kind of testing the water, maybe a lower percentage and increasing the percentage. That involves a lot more administrative stuff. And since we have a 4-year term right now, just to begin implementing, I wonder how difficult it would be to do changes annually. And you have all these contracts coming up and vendor timing and all that stuff. Is that impractical? I'm just asking as a people who are dealing with the vendors, is that impractical to review it? Or are we better off just saying, we decide one of these X%, that's it,
Yeah.
and not revisit it so often? I mean, maybe 3-5 years out, but not annually.
Yeah. In my experience in working with cities across 3 states, all on the West Coast here, a lot of them are in California. Actually, they have something similar to this called utility users tax, basically the same thing, utility tax. The hard lift is getting it implemented on day one, and some are easier than others. Water, sewer, you know who the providers are of those services, right? Gas, electric, you know who the provider is there. Telecom, oh yeah, that's really difficult because you're looking at cell providers and all the different land-based carriers and all that. So there's a big lift that's required, and it can take up to about a year to get that completely implemented so that you're starting to recognize all those revenues. Changing it then just requires enough advance notice to the community and to the rate collectors, which are the utility providers. So it's not as heavy of a lift, but there still is an administrative burden on that. So is it doable? Yes. It's just that there will be some additional need for that. And actually the revenue or the revenue amounts that we were looking at here were net of the expectation of needing some, costs incurred, whether it's staff or whether it's,
I just would say
contractors.
additional staff and
Yeah,
support.
to
yeah.
enforce
Mhm.
the revenue collections. So,
Thanks, Owen. I just wanted to ask a couple questions on the garbage with solid waste. Do we not require all our residents to pay for garbage service? I thought in the urban areas, basically you require everyone has to pay for it. That's the deterrent for not illegally dumping because you're paying anyway,
We do not require
but
at
we
the
do not.
moment.
Okay.
So that's a policy decision
Mhm.
that council could choose at the moment, just to complicate things. Just so we're all clear about this right now, because when the city annexed Klahani, they were on a separate contract. They are still on a separate contract. So even if we did something right now, we couldn't compel Klahani residents to do mandatory garbage.
Got it. Interesting.
Because, things are complicated.
Yes. So I get then the concern about adding the tax, yeah.
But you
Um,
could tax.
And then I mean, I don't know how much it would affect it, but my main concern in all of these fundraising opportunities is the impact on seniors and low-income residents, which, we're already, because of the huge increases in property values, we're already, forcing people to stretch. And so, I did include this because it's just too, it generates too much. I mean, your point that if we don't do this, then there's something else that we'll have to do. So the way to mitigate that is to have a program so that low income and seniors can either be exempt from the tax or have some break from it. And I don't know what those things are, but, and I don't know how much that would affect the revenue estimate. So.
but those are all part of the modeling of the ordinance, right? And that is an option that would be available. Would need to, leverage the city attorney to talk about, what the extent is of being able to do that. But I've seen other agencies that just leverage if they're, because that can be an administrative nightmare to have every household indicate what, senior, are they senior, are they not? And also, low income, dealing with that type of an issue as well. There are utility providers that already have that in place, and some agencies will just leverage that and say that if you qualified somewhat, with let's say the electric provider, then great, you qualify for our thing. And so that's kind of a way to reduce the administrative burden. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Regarding the solid waste, we have both the solid waste franchise fee as an option and the utility tax, and I would support one or the other.
Got it. Okay. All right. Julie?
Just as a follow-up to Debbie's question about, and the comment about people not having solid waste service, do we know how many people don't have service? Are we missing a large swath of it? And is that built into your, is it material?
It's pretty small.
Okay.
It's
All
pretty
right.
small.
So
Yeah.
a solid waste would generate enough because you're effectively getting most of the.
It's most of the city, and granted, I don't know, Steve, I don't know the answer to this. Does the solid waste, what we looked at for the utility tax, that covers the whole city, not just minus Klahani?
Yeah, without knowing the exact amount of revenues that were being generated by the solid waste providers, we did it on a per capita basis, which we thought had some reasonable, expectations. So we were assuming anywhere from 800,000 to 930,000, depending on what rate you were using, 6 or 7%. I just want to say that again, I'm so sorry about the 10% thing. It was supposed to say 7, and that's actually what the report said. But the 7%, the reason that we modeled that was because that was what the median rate was of the comparable agencies. So some agencies had 10 or 15% and others had 3%. So we took kind of that median range, and that was why we had come up with a 7% for that. So if there's
Question there then. So at 6%, we're still below sort of the average of what other cities are doing.
correct.
Yes. Okay. So that's good to know.
Sam, what-
From over
what is
here in Ohio, what I'm hearing in that room is really some consensus around the middle option, but potentially without the solid waste piece, and then some hemming on stormwater, but without the solid waste piece, as Steve mentioned, if you did 6% on electric, gas, telecom, cable, water, sewer, and stormwater, you'd be at about 10 million. And to the point that we heard from, Owen and Debbie and others, that takes a big bite out of the apple, right? Out of where you're headed. Am I hearing wrong, or is that
in
I
general?
see some nodding heads?
Yeah, the Zoom is working in Ohio, Sam, so that's good, yeah.
We didn't talk about, well, is there any heartburn over calling it a consensus on a 6%, but not including solid waste?
I think we want, either includes the solid waste tax or the franchise, the one or the other. Right, so, but not both. And we did not want to include stormwater, you're correct. I got it?
So
So I don't know if
Yeah,
there's any
as
preference.
Don
over-
said, I chose the first option because I also chose the franchise fee on the solid waste, because I thought we'll put the look on the provider to then pass it on versus taxing all to the citizens. Does that make sense?
yeah, no, it makes sense. I think that if we for this strategy, if we strip out the solid waste and if we stripped out stormwater, we're probably going to be in the neighborhood of about 9-ish million, 9.5 million or something like that, if you went with a 6%. So, and again, we can look at this and we'll model it and see what it looks like and what the impact would be. I think that's roughly where we would probably, where the city might end up in terms of that. So, okay. Sam, does that give you?
That does. I'm gonna write down that we've got some consensus around a 6% utility users tax, excluding stormwater and solid waste, with a discussion to come on the solid waste franchise fee, and then seeing where that lands in terms of whether you all would support that, or if we want to put it back into the utility users tax. But I'm gonna grab the consensus on 6% utility users tax, excluding stormwater and solid waste, unless somebody waves at me and says don't do that.
Richard has the point.
I see some waving.
How about just run the numbers on the 3% for the water and the sewer as well, just to see what, what.
So that would be water and sewer only at 3%, but the other one's at 6%?
Yeah.
Okay. That would be about, it would drop it from 9.5 million to about, I'm doing it on the fly here, Richard, what are you doing? It'd be about 7.5 or 8 million. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess in terms of the process, I see Sam is trying to get an idea. But I guess I'm hesitant to say, oh, it's this one, 4A is good, but 6C is not. Because I think we all put it together as kind of a strategy.
Package.
And so if you take some of this, and now like for my strategy, well, now I got to come up with 2.7 million that I didn't have before, that I don't have in my strategy. And therefore, this the process itself, I guess I'm hesitant to say, yep, take that out, because we got there, but then the rest of my choices have fallen apart.
Yeah, got it. Okay, all right. So let me rephrase, and maybe Sam, if that's okay, is
Yeah.
that we're hearing that utility tax is something that should definitely be on the table. We think that a 6% model seems to be good, but we just need to see how we might want to pull that together as we look at the other strategies. Just so, okay, does that make sense?
I guess, you know, if there's some conceptual conclusions that you guys can make, I
Yeah.
think we're there. But when you start to, you know, line item this off and that off, and then I don't line on if the other one's up, and then my my math is off, and then I can't stand behind my strategy, you know,
Right.
this could take forever if
Yeah, I
you
get it.
don't just grab a
You're
conceptual.
right. Yeah. Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, I'm looking at the whole process. So if we go to the middle column, well, that gives me an additional 3-4 million on top of my column A choice, which means I may not be so vocal as the other items as we go along the way. If that's the consensus, okay, then this item here for $1 million or 2 million, okay, not going to go for that because we already covered that part. So that's kind of part of the process of this. Yeah.
Takes them up, and now, you know, we're all kind of off balance with that because we all do different things. So
Yeah, and we can, you know, capture what we're hearing and what, you know, how you all are reflecting on these strategies and hold that, right? And then once we've gone through the discussion of these strategies and we have some sense of what we're hearing, we can circle back and pull it all together in a package, right? And you know, when I think Jessica's taken some notes as well on some of the dollar amounts and the differences in some of the ideas that you have here. And when she brings up the model, and we can start incorporating some of those different ideas and, you know, what does it look like with 3% water sewer and 6% for everything else, that'll help, you know, solidify some of the thinking and really put some pictures and show how the forecast will change depending on, you know, where you all are landing and your reflections on these. And so, you know, as much as I have a desire to, you know, have you guys make a decision, maybe that's not where we should be at this point, right? And we're just going to hear from each other and reflect, and we'll take some notes, and then we'll come back and pick it back up when we have heard from you all on most of these strategies and go look at the model.
Owen might have 5 million in his other line items that I don't know about. So
well, with that, I think unless anybody has some additional thoughts on the utility users tax, I will move to the next budget strategy. So this is the Metropolitan Parks District. Again, everybody identified it either as an option to pursue as a priority, as a secondary priority, or pursue it, but as a last resort. And so you can see the comments that folks made as well. Reflection on a Metropolitan Parks District. And as a reminder, the utility users tax that we were just discussing is an option that council can implement on their own, though it's potentially subject to a referendum. The Metropolitan Parks District would be a vote of your fellow community members.
So looking at people in the room, any reflection on MPD? Nancy?
Of course, as Chair of the Parks Commission, I'm going to reflect on this quite powerfully. I want to change my score to a 0 from a 2. I did my form before I had a chance to investigate what a Metropolitan Parks District would do. And it does require a vote of the community. And I don't think that it would be approved. People in Sammamish are very, very happy with their parks. We're just completing another pro plan, and we don't have the numbers yet, but it shows how happy people are. And my feeling is that if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. You know, we don't need, and I did a little bit of research about some of the other cities that have parks districts, Metropolitan Parks Districts, and it's often to fix a problem that they have with their parks, either administrative or a service problem. We don't have a problem with our parks. Our parks are the envy. They're one of the big reasons why our city was named one of the most livable cities in the country is because of our parks. And because people preserve this as a safe place to raise a family, a safe place to live. They enjoy our parks. And I just don't feel that this is a good option. Seattle Parks, Tacoma Parks, these are all parks districts. They are not up to the standard that we expect here. You know, we expect our parks to be perfect. And which they are, because we have an excellent park system. So I don't think this change would be productive.
Owen, go ahead.
Question about the funding. Is it fully funded for the next 5-10 years?
We have yep, yes. If you want to look at the budget that we have well put together, we've been raising the costs for people using some of the services like the fields to try to cover some of the expenses. So we have money in the bank.
But let's be clear, though, that parks maintenance is part of the general fund, and there
Right.
is no dedicated revenue source to pay for park maintenance.
But you have to remember that some of that maintenance, so those people that work full-time, during the wintertime, they do road plowing. So some of that's facilities stuff that is also covered with parks operations. I think this would be a poor choice.
Okay. All right.
I do.
I see Julie, John, and Don all.
So my general counterpoint to Nancy is the parks budget is probably the most exposed general fund budget item to budget cuts. There's not a lot of discretionary room in the general fund because of our police and fire contracts. So if we could implement a park district, it would provide that ultimate buffer to the parks budget. Yeah, and staff and Aaron can figure out, you know, that roads work is not getting charged to the parks budget. You can split people. So I think it's more of a protective measure, but it will be a big lift because it would have to go to the voters.
Yeah, Julie and Don, I'll let you guys decide. Julie?
That was my concern as well. I love the parks here, and I think I agree that that's one of the reasons people live here. And I thought it more of a protective measure that people would be willing to pay and to pay a levy or however it's funded, just to protect the park budget, because that would be my concern, would be the park budget. So but I don't know about, I'm not experienced in how these things work. But I just thought that putting it to a vote and putting it out to the residents who really care about it would allow them to say that they want it funded, and it would preserve it. That was why I chose it.
If we can ensure that would be the case.
Don, go ahead.
Yes, I had the question about if you have a park district, does all the real property go into the district, and is it then taxable by all the other agencies?
No, the district is a separate district, and it makes decisions. Well, let me talk about what separate district means. It's a separate district, a taxing authority, and it has the ability to go ahead and levy taxes on it. It's not like other agencies saying, well, we want our piece too. They're all separate taxing agencies. So it's not like schools, for example, could say, we want 1/10 of what you're getting too. If that's what you're saying.
Right now, the city owns the property and it's not taxable. City-owned property isn't taxable, it's property tax. But district property, is that taxable?
No,
Real property taxable?
no.
Okay.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that special district component is that under state law, a city council can put to voters whether they want to create this parks district, right? The Metropolitan Parks District. And with that also comes the question that's proposed by the council as to whether it's a separate board or whether it's the city council that is the board of the Metropolitan Park District. And so it doesn't necessarily turn over the service level standards, et cetera, to another agency or another operating board, if the council decides as part of the enacting legislation that's brought before voters to retain that control as the city. So in some regards, it ends up just being a taxing district authority rather than a separate operating organization. But there's different models with how different agencies have done
I'm
it.
just worried about a decline in services. And would it be better for us to have a parks bond? What would be what's the difference?
So Parks Bond,
Parks bond, a maintenance and operation bond. Maybe with two parts to it, because we are going to be facing some major parks projects like Klahani Park, a redo there, the Pickett property. What would be the difference? Could we keep the city functions all together in one place, but have a maintenance and operation and maybe a levy for capital projects, as opposed to the Metropolitan Parks District?
Yeah, thank you. If I may, thank you, Steve. Appreciate the question, Nancy. Remember that if you go out for a levy lid lift, for instance, to do M&O for parks, you have to, that's a finite period and you have to renew it at maximum every 6 years or sooner. One of the appeals of doing an MPD is that if it passes, then it has its own portion of the property tax that's solely for the Metro Parks District. And the board of that district, whether it's the city council or it's a different board, then has full control over the taxing authority within what they're allotted. So up to 75 cents per thousand is available to a Metro Parks District. Now, I think if I recall correctly from the information, what we have today would be about 14 cents per thousand. And so from the perspective of, and I think John brought up, it pulls it out of the general fund and it creates a totally separate, secure, permanent taxing source for parks. As opposed to whether you do a bond or a maintenance levy, the bond is solely for capital. And then you have to be able to pay it off. So that's a year over year debt service payment. Or if you do a maintenance and operation levy, that's a levy lid lift that then has to continually be renewed if you want it to continue.
So the disadvantage of that is it's another property tax, the bond.
It is another property tax, but the same as a levy lid lift would be an increase of a property tax. Yeah, it's a separate bite at the property tax apple.
So is the Parks District also a property tax then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're adding more property tax.
So this is the legislature provided options because the 1% is so restrictive. They've provided ways to get around the 1% by going different pathways to try to get at the understanding two things. One, that the 1% is very restrictive, but they weren't willing to change it. And two, that to John's point, parks is a discretionary at the end of the day component of a city's budget. Along with some other things, but the bigger pieces, police, fire, services like, making sure the roads work and stuff like that are always going to be, unfortunately, higher priorities than parks. So it's a recognition of sort of the ability to say, here's something that you can carve off, have its own funding source, and then it's funded in perpetuity.
I don't mean to monopolize this discussion, but what about maintenance? The use of staff interchangeably between departments, and in the wintertime, the parks maintenance people don't have as much to do, so they pitch in with other city projects. I mean, how would that management be?
It's just an internal billing transfer. Yeah, the general fund would pay parks for the extra help from parks employees, in essence.
It just seems like such a slick thing. You have this staff that work here in the city and they're maintaining the same.
We already do that now with stormwater, because stormwater is an enterprise fund.
Oh, enterprise.
So in effect, it's essentially an enterprise fund. It just has a different funding source, where the stormwater, it's a fee on your property. That's a rate based as opposed to just straight property tax. And so when stormwater does work for others, then the general fund pays stormwater back for the time, and it's a transfer in between funds.
Well, I appreciate Nancy's thoughts because well, it didn't so much remind me, but I had served for quite a few years on the City of Sammamish Park Commission, plus 2 other cities, one being a state capital. And now time has changed a little bit. And one of the things was city value. But also we're at a place to move forward. And this is where this park maintenance district looks like it kind of puts a hold on worrying about the parks and the income. And we can move forward at the same time, concentrate on some of the other necessities. And it's kind of complicated. Yes, one side says me wants to buy and increase our parks, but I think we need to be realistic.
Got it. Any other response, Michael?
Yeah, I appreciate Nancy's insight. I haven't even watched any of the your meetings that you guys have, so I feel unarmed. But at the same time, I thought, well, we have again these 16 levers to pull. And I started to talk to my friends and families, and we talked about parks. And I said, well, how about police? You want to cut that? How about fire? We went down the list, and it was kind of like, well, I kind of had to hold my nose and choose something. I can't choose nothing, or we'll come up with 0. And the other ones seem to be less favored, I guess I would say, from the people I talked to. And I look at that in appreciation for the parks, in that if you're going to have a vote or a levy, and of all things, people, I think, were highly supportive of parks. So if we're going to solve a problem, I think it's more likely for something like that to get a vote than something not. Although, boy, I tell you, that's my supposition. Although I have to say, most votes I see out there, you rarely see lately levy not passed. I mean, this area is pretty happy to say yes to those things. But that's all projection, don't know. But I guess from my standpoint, I put a 3 because it was, again, a choice of alternatives, and it's a high value. And I went back to the city's values that we wanted to look at, and it was in support of that. So thanks.
Got it. Okay, great. Any other points on this? Richard, go ahead.
Maybe Scott said it, that 0.4142 and the $5 million, that kind of is backed out from about what we spend for the parks now. Is that where you guys came up with that number roughly?
That's right.
That's
Okay. So
As Sam said, yes.
so that's maybe a way to.
Yeah, so that it would be a dedicated funding source fully for parks.
I asked my wife what she thought about a parks thing, and she said, "Oh yeah, I like the parks." So probably, so it might pass. whatever
Survey says, yeah. Okay. So do we want to move on to the next strategy and review what we saw there? So, oh, go ahead. Was there one other? Debbie?
Well, I was just going to say that I ranked it low because I hadn't looked at the amount we spend on it. I mean, this would literally be about 40% of what we spend on parks. I just thought 5 million was awfully high. Not because of the 0.142, but just that I didn't realize how expensive it is to maintain our parks. And so the point that if the parks were ever to be in danger of having their maintenance cut, I am confident the public would support it. But yeah, but I feel like, and as I pointed in my comment, I really feel like that is considered to be part of just a basic requirement of the city. And we shouldn't need to raise taxes to cover something that's really just part of our basic services.
Okay. Next strategy, Sam?
All right. So the next one that we have is the traffic enforcement technology, and this has some caveats associated with it in terms of needing to justify the technology by identifying those signals where traffic enforcement technology would reduce the it would increase pedestrian safety, excuse me. This would also come with, and we incorporated into the memo, additional costs for implementing the technology and reviewing the tape and administering the program. This did get, as you can see, some level of consensus. We had one person who would not pursue this. And I think before I open it to the floor, Scott, is there anything else that you would add, putting you on the spot, as caveats for the traffic enforcement technology option?
Thanks, Sam. So one of the things that we would have to be able to make the case and actually show that there is a traffic safety need at whatever intersections that you might propose this at. And I think in anecdotally and talking to our traffic enforcement folks, we're not sure there is actually an intersection where we could actually make the case. We don't have a lot of collisions here in town. We just don't.
What about school zones?
School zones is a different option, but again, I think there's only a couple of schools that would warrant. Again, you have to have a traffic safety concern where there's been something where you can point to and say, because ultimately the red light cameras have to solve a traffic problem. Yes, they generate revenue, but they have to solve a traffic problem at the end of the day.
So what about, now I'm drawing a blank on the name of it, but the Sammamish Landing. That is a terrible risk factor, in my opinion, for the city. Can that qualify in some way?
So there is something that you can do a traffic camera for a park. It can only be in place during park hours, the hours that the park is open. And so again, it's a bit of more of a limited scope. And it, again, changes the paradigm. If you only have one, you have all the administration, but you only have the one to, because the administration piece is you have to have an officer review every ticket that goes out. There's more cost on the district court side, because then if they challenge, that's where those go. And so and then the administrative costs of actually setting up and initializing the camera and then maintaining it. So everything comes, it turns out nothing in life is free, and the best laid plans, as it were.
So Scott, is this both for speeding and lights, or is it just for lights?
Whether it is a speed zone camera or whether it's a red light camera, the same principle exists.
Neither we would have enough
Well, we certainly have, and I think everyone can attest to, especially I'm looking at Debbie because she lives near East Lake Sammamish Parkway, that I don't think anyone goes the speed limit down there. And I can safely say here through town, in the middle of town, I'm not sure anyone actually goes the speed limit. They either go well under or well over, and no one actually gets right at the speed limit. But the fact of the matter is that what we don't have are actual accidents where we can point to and say that is a high accident, whether it's intersection or corridor where there are, for instance, one of the benefits of redoing 228th and putting the medians and the turn pockets in is that it essentially eliminated all that, because now there's no left turning movement except in specific areas generally signalized. So that solved the majority of that. Generally, when you have things like that, it's the left turn across movements when people are speeding where they think they can make it and they can't. So, again, a lot of that has been sorted out in the past. And so we really just don't have places. Now, this is anecdotal. We, obviously, if the recommendation would be pursue this, we would do some work to try to figure out if anything, if there would be any place in the city that it functions, but our traffic control officer has been here for a number of years and has really good sense of, where the problems are.
We just take it off the list as a waste of time.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I guess I'll comment as the only red zero up there. Hearing what you said before, Scott, I thought, well, again, I've got so many choices to make, and I didn't need this one to solve the problem. This is $900,000. That means that you're going to write 100 tickets every day forever to make this thing work. And that means the police are going to be stopping people on the road out here 100 times a day.
It's somewhat of an automated.
Oh, yeah, you're
process that
gonna,
the camera's
I
going to-
should say reviewing all
But
those tickets.
It will
and
require an officer dedicated to reviewing.
Review those,
each of
and then the
incidents.
courts, and then the courts also, you can deny that you were driving, and then you have to adjudicate that. And it just seemed a lot of work, a lot of squeeze for the juice, as we say, and it didn't fit into, I didn't need this $900,000 to hit the mark. But at the same time, I went back to the values and said, wow, cameras in Sammamish, it just struck me as not the tone that we wanted to set.
Let's, this one's the most squishy, perhaps, of all of them. And so I think let's hold off on that one then. And then look at the next item, if that's okay with everybody. So, okay, go ahead, Sam.
This is the Transportation Benefit District at the councilmanic level, which would be less than 50. You would have to start at $20, and then that you could bump that up as you go. And that was incorporated into the analysis and the thought process behind the strategy. Again, here, two folks who did not would suggest we not pursue this. And I think as a starting point for the discussion, I'll put you on the spot, Michael and Rich, and maybe ask you why not, as we hear from the others who all would pursue it as a priority or as a secondary priority.
Yeah, once again, I voted 0 because I already hit 15 and 18 million.
So, and I'm just going to press you a little bit on that, Michael. As we think about and we continue to move through this, and we get towards the end and we start to sort of play to find that number that we need. What I hear is you hit your 15, and so everything else was a 0. Does that mean that if we don't hit it, that you could potentially be in favor of something like this?
Yeah, at the end, that's still the number we have to eclipse. So if that's what we have to do. So I was looking for things that I thought, by the materials that were set out, could we do it? How long would it take? Would it get us there? What would the values match be? And so I have to, evaluate each one of those if in fact, we go down a different path. That's why seeing things in totality, I think, will actually allow me to choose differently.
I guess we're already paying a lot for license plates for cars, and we're paying the RTA tax and not getting anything out of it really. And then my main reason probably is if we're going to raise taxes, whether utility taxes or property taxes or some of these other ones, I think it's good that it applies to everybody in the city to make it hurt equally. And not just penalize car owners, I'll say, or, tax the car owners. So I think, something like a property tax, whether even the park tax or these other ones might be better.
Okay, got it. I just want to check. Sam and Jessica, are you able to hear Rich okay?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, good, all right. Okay. Any other reflections on the TBD? Larry?
I will. I thought about this quite a bit, and I was again concerned about the retroactiveness, the regressive tax. But then I personally know people that have 5 or 6 cars and live in fairly nice homes. So it seemed like the relationship between climate and cars is important right now. And that's one of the reasons I felt, well, in a way, maybe they would sell their car, not bring it, or go ahead and pay the $20 a year. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Rich.
I guess they can still only drive one at a time though, even if you've got 5, but you know, so,
Yeah.
well, but if they really need to go somewhere, they'll switch around and somebody will have to be burning gas, I guess, or whatever.
I was going to joke that if the people you know have nice homes and 5 cars, this won't hurt them.
I did want to reflect just briefly on your thought, Rich, about spreading the love and that this would only apply to vehicle owners. Yes, it would only apply to vehicle owners, but then the revenue generated from the transportation benefit district would be restricted to transportation related projects, right? And so you could make an argument that those transportation related projects more directly benefit car owners. And so it's a 1-for-1 in that way.
Yeah, and it helps offload the general fund from having to otherwise pay for some of those, street improvements and et cetera. So,
Okay, thanks. That's a good point.
okay. Oh, Christine?
I just wanted to say related to the town center, and there's many projects in the town center. Our particular project passed concurrency, and the notion of the town center is actually to make it more walkable and reduce car trips. So I just wanted to make people remember that, and also it helps support the city's climate action plan as well. Thank you.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks, Christine. Good. Julie?
I was gonna say, Rich, to your point, we don't get benefit out of the transit tax because I don't know anybody that doesn't have a car out here.
Well, but there's no services out here. for
I know,
that.
that's
mean,
why,
I need
exactly,
to
yeah, that's what,
relate, right?
yeah, I know, it'll come, but that's, I mean, I think probably every family I know out here has a car. So to me, and you're tying it directly to the use of the roads. So, yeah.
Rich was making the chicken and the egg analogy, right? Yeah. Right. Okay. Sam, want to move to the next?
Yeah, moving
sub-strategies?
right along. We've got, so that was the first set of those that received a rating of greater than 2. This set of 5 all received a priority rating, an average priority rating between 1 and 2. And here's the solid waste franchise fee. The admissions tax, economic development strategies, service reductions, and special purpose tax levy. And so we'll, as we did with the previous strategies, we'll look at these one by one and how folks rated them. So the solid waste franchise fee, again, it got a rating of 2. A couple of folks would not pursue it, while everybody else would pursue it as a priority or as a secondary priority. And of course, we did hear earlier that some folks could perhaps be in favor of this instead of the utility users tax on solid waste, or potentially the utility users tax on solid waste and not the solid waste franchise fee. Thoughts?
I have a comment based on the previous discussion and how it relates to this. If we look at adopting or recommending adoption of the utility fees, perhaps rather than lump everything in that, having this, at least this one that can be passed on to the utility company instead of directly to the taxpayer might be perceived better. I don't know.
that we're levying it on the solid waste company, and then they in turn are deciding to.
But would they, they're still
Oh,
dollar for
yeah.
dollar to every, but
In my experience, yes.
would it end up being the same? I mean, same impact on the individual?
In my experience, again, what they would typically do is say, okay, if we're going to have to pay the equivalent of X percent,
Mhm.
we're going to levy that onto the solid waste bill.
Okay, then I like the
But it's a
lumping
question
them
of,
all together, so we're not dealing with
y-
two
y-
different,
there
administering
does
two
get to be
different
that
programs.
nuance sometimes of, well, the city's really levying it on the solid waste provider. They're the one that's making the decision or whatever, as opposed to utility tax is actually on the, end user directly. So collected through that utility.
It's all
Yeah,
in the
yeah, I think-
marketing. It's all in the marketing, right?
Yeah, they'll still pull it out separately on your bill. They're very, very good about whether it's a franchise fee or utility tax. It's always going to show up as a separate line item because they don't want to take ownership of it.
Well, given that, then I would rather see the tax. If we're going to recommend any utility tax, and it's going to include, and we're going to recommend something on solid waste, let's just do it all in the utility.
Any other reflections on the solid waste franchise fee strategy? Sam, go to the next one.
The admissions tax on a golf course, and we had identified 3 different levels of that tax. Lots of lots of golfers on this task force.
Yeah, this one's in the rough. There's not a lot of green here. I've been waiting all night.
We should tax pickleball.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, John, go ahead.
So later this month, I'm going to New York, and the hotel motel tax in New York, it was unbelievably high. This is one tax that we can pass along to non-residents. And that's
That's true. Well, yeah, to the extent that, yeah.
the second point is that in this particular case, golf is a discretionary activity. We've got lots of park trails and other ways that you can get exercise. Going to play golf with little Mr. Round White, trying to meet Mr. Cup is something you can decide to do. And so taxing that entertainment / exercise, as well as being able to reach out and tap the wallets of non-city residents, I thought was a good way to go.
Any golfers that wish to rebut that comment? I'm kidding, John. I'm kidding. But no, I see your point clearly.
I know I've already spoken too much on this, but it only generates 200,000. It just seems like a lot of pain for not a lot of result.
200 to 500,000, depending on the percentage and the overall estimate.
Yeah, I kind of missed the discussion on that. My internet cut out when you were talking about it last time. Is it taxed on the like the non-members who come and pay at the country clubs? Because they're all private country clubs. We don't have any public courses
Right.
in Sammamish.
Yeah. So the way that it's implemented is that the private golf course will need to provide to the city an assessment of their membership fee. To what extent is that membership fee paying for the actual use of the course and the use of the recreational amenities versus like the clubhouse lunches that they get and all that other stuff. So you have to actually bifurcate that. And so the estimate that we had come up with was based on that. It was based on assuming what a typical round might be, the number that might be generated based on the type of courses that you have here, using some statewide and national averages.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, based on that, they are pretty expensive. So, I mean, I assume you might generate more. But I don't favor it, but because my husband golfs, but But also I thought that if it was 200 to 500, that there were other bigger ways to get to the number we needed to get to.
Yeah, get that. Yeah. Any further discussion on the admissions tax, Larry?
Well, I was trying to think back when I voted positive on this, and it was to me, it seemed like a win-win. And I can't speak for the private golf courses, but have them involved in the operation and the vision of the city, I think is a good idea. And if we're getting funds from them, maybe even more people would go out and start playing golf. So I try to look at it as a positive, as I do most things, and hopefully that bring it up to par.
We'll have a we will have a vote tonight for the greatest mom/dad joke about golf tonight. So, okay. Sam, you want to move next one?
Yes. All right. Economic development strategies that would produce an estimate of around $500,000 here. You know, full spectrum of scores, a few do not pursues. Any thoughts or comments about economic development strategies?
Don, then John, then John, and then Owen.
Well, there's a wide range of economic development strategies that we can't even deal with here. And actually, there was an economic development study done some years ago, which could have been looked at to decide what's possible.
It informed this.
Yes. And since we talked about perhaps the town center plan discussion being at the end of this, I look to that discussion.
Okay, John, then Owen.
So I'm wondering if this is sort of a non-issue in the sense that the comp plan update that we're working on right now has an economic development component to it. So the city council is already sort of dipping their toe in the water on moving forward with some sort of economic development planning.
Owen.
In this document, it reads that about the TC project is not expected to be able to generate ongoing revenues that would achieve anywhere near the 22 million projected future deficit. Same could be said about all these other options here. So I want to know, just to get some kind of level setting here, what is the economic impact of the town center in terms of what number of units we have today versus what's going to be onboarding soon? And at the end of this project phase so far, what's the total number of units? And would that, and why wouldn't that part be a part of this discussion?
Yeah, good questions on that. So it's not that we wanted to close our eyes to the town center at all. It's just what could we assume that was going to be as part of the baseline forecast? And then to what extent then does it incorporate then some of the discussions about the budget strategy itself to really push forward on a rampant economic development component? I think with respect to the existing, and I don't want to put Christine on the spot, but I'm just going to remember, or maybe, I don't know if Jessica, you have that, but I think there was about 150 units or so, I think that, oh no, not that many that are approved right now. And then there are some others that are being, was it 300 or 400 apartment units that were being considered for the second phase that's being discussed right now?
The information that I have is that the first phase would include 10 single-family homes and 28 townhomes. And then an additional future development would include a 300-unit apartment complex with 48 additional townhomes.
That's the data that we had received. Does that jive up to what you're working with, Christine, right now?
Yeah, I think the thing I would add is the retail. So it's a core mixed use area. Right now, about 90% of the shopping is exported to cities outside of Sammamish. And to be able to capture that revenue in the city would move the needle.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, just in general, without getting into specifics, because are we talking about like restaurants, shops, nail salons, those types of things, or are we talking big box stores? What do you? I don't think it's big box stores, right?
Based on the current plan, and Scott, you know, more of the specifics here, but we do have one area that is high use retail and the rest is social retail. So restaurants, bars and what have you. The high use retail could be a hardware store or, you know, some kind of high use retail. But based on the survey data we have from people in the community, entertainment needs and fine dining and family restaurants rate quite high.
Yeah.
And that's what we're planning.
Got it. Yeah. And just to ask one more piece of that question, because hardware store can mean a variety of different things. It can be like your typical neighborhood, I'm dating myself, your typical Ace Hardware versus Lowe's / Home Depot, which is gadzooks different in terms of that. Are you thinking more in terms of that the spaces would be more of the smaller type of neighborhood hardware store or those larger big box Home Depots?
What we're trying to accomplish is keeping the character of Sammamish. So, you know, the particular layout and floor plates for retail is in development right now. So I wouldn't say we're driving towards ruining Sammamish. We want to protect Sammamish and what we love about it. So, and we're using community feedback to make that happen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just wanted to kind of just understand kind of that nature. And I'll just say, and then I want to turn to Don or Owen back to that. When we were evaluating the potential for revenue generation from the town center, we had to go based on what we currently know. And that was based on those, what Jessica had indicated, that seems like Christine, you were affirming, and then understanding what the nature of that retail might be. And frankly, what moves the needle in a city that's the size of Sammamish, and especially the size of the Gap that you have, what moves the needle are the big box stores. It's very important to have that local retail component. It leads to quality of life. It does help with revenue generation, but does it generate the $1 million a year? Does it generate more of the 100 to 200,000 in ongoing sales tax revenue per year? And that's kind of what we were looking at. And so we didn't want to just overlook that. And I just want to make sure that you understand that, and that those that you work with understand that. We weren't trying to mask ourselves to that at all, but it's just what can we reasonably rely on a baseline forecast, and then to what extent, based on the development that's currently underway, you know, to what extent will that be able to have that ongoing? And, you know, again, when you look at I'm sorry, I just love your guys' community here. When you look at the property tax levy rate right now, that is 98 cents per $1,000, right? I mean, make sure I get the decimals in the right places there. You know, it would require, just to move $500,000 would require the neighborhood of about 1,000 residences that have an assessed valuation of $500,000 to move $500,000. And we're talking about a $18 million gap. And so when we're looking at the magnitude of ongoing, clearly there's going to be construction tax. There's going to be those one-time things that are going to be coming on while the development is happening, which is very helpful for the city. Very, very helpful. But on an ongoing basis, we need to then, you know, we needed to understand kind of what the nature of that would be and how many would be developed, and then therefore based on the existing tax levy rate, how much of that will be ongoing in property tax, and then as well as the retail. So I just wanted to help, you know, all understand kind of what our perspective was when we were coming up with these strategies, and also the baseline forecast. I know Don and Owen, you go ahead, Don.
Well, just to clarify regarding big box stores, from the beginning of incorporation, the community and the councils have said no big box stores.
Yeah.
So that should be off the table, period. I think in terms of the town center, we've got a zone for 2,000 to 2,400 units. I think you should assume that that will be built. And so if you look in the future, 10 years or something like that, you should assume that's built. And then if that's $1 billion worth of property, recall that on the sale of property, there's a real estate excise tax and the city gets 0.5%. And if you assume that property sells every 10 years on the average, you can figure out what sort of ongoing income. Yes, it goes to capital, but nevertheless, it's an income generation.
The REIT.
Yes.
Money that would come in. That right now is a separate fund and is not included in the general fund.
I think the reasons that's not included though is that that's a lot of assumptions. Right? That all these are going to be developed in such short order. We don't know what the economy is going to bring us, and that's why it's not included. Is that right? We were going based on what we know.
That's correct. We went
Based
based
on
on
what
what
we
was
know.
reasonably expected to come in. Now that's sad, but let's think about that, because with the development that you're all talking about with the town center, and to the extent that it gets through the entitlement phase, and then getting to permitting, and then actually get construction in the ground, there will be an uptick. The question is, what is the reasonable expectation of what that uptick might be, and to what extent does it reduce the amount of strategies that might be required in the future when you reset the model and reset? I think that was one of the questions we had last time, right? Is that the city would continue to update that forecast every 1 to 2 years to take a fresh look at what is the revenue that's coming in, and then does that have an impact in terms of being able to reasonably reduce the expectation for some of these other budget strategies that might be required in future years. So I don't know if that's helpful with that. Christine, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate the dialogue here. And I think one thing we wanted to make sure, given that it was removed in the fact that the forecast is to 2035, is that before we move to raise taxes on residents, to consider that the town center number is not going to be zero. We know that. Is it going to be enough to bridge the gap? I mean, we have to start somewhere. We will follow the process, and we know, nothing's guaranteed. We get that, but we just want to, before we jump to going straight to levies and taxes, that, this is a discussion that we feel needs to be had.
Owen?
I was thinking about Don's comment about our community does not want big box retail. If that's off the table, then we have to face the reality that our costs will be going up. And unless people are happy to get taxed higher, whether through a levy or all these other tax issues, then that's a fact that residents have to acknowledge. Maybe that's part of your marketing of these proposals. Hey, we don't have a lot of retail here. We have a lot of retail leakage, as we talked about. Everyone's leaving the plateau to go elsewhere. So the local revenues aren't here. So that's something people have to kind of acknowledge, that if we don't have this help that helps Bellevue, Kirkland, Issaquah, then we will continue to pay directly as opposed to retail outlets. That's a harsh reality, right? For people who want to live in this community.
Go ahead, Don.
Just one point, and that is with the sales tax now destination based and more people buying online, some of the big boxes are struggling. And some of the cities that were based on the revenues from the big boxes are hurting. Like Auburn complained when it switched to destination based, and we benefit from it. I don't know what percentage of our sales tax revenue now is from destination based versus local retail.
If I remember, online purchasing is 10%, if not maybe 15 at most in some places. So that's still a huge proportion that is bought locally, in store, on the premises. So unless online purchasing goes to 50, 60%, we can't really look at that as an opportunity.
Jeff Bezos might want that to happen, but.
Oh, sure.
I don't know. I'm looking at the finance people. I don't know if you guys even know the answer to that, or we'll have to just look that up. But Michael, go ahead while Aaron's.
Yeah, I guess I think about this as retail, and I was also thinking about the practicality of big box. I have no idea where that might sit on top of it all, right? There's no room in my neighborhood. But I also think about retail, and I maybe of a bunch of these, I will say pro-business, in that I think most of these small places have an unusually small margin. You'd be surprised at how they operate. You know, all these grocery stores are on a 2-3% margin. You start to do that and you tax them, they actually don't, and we all know, don't pay that tax. We do, right? That's why you go to that's why our restaurant bills are astronomical now. Yeah, grocery store, I can't believe how much I'm paying at QFC. Yes, inflation, but you know, when you increase taxes, they're going to pass that on. I just find that I am saddened when I see some of the empty spots, either at Safeway or QFC. My kids were really disappointed when Baskin Robbins left. I was crushed when Ace Hardware left. So I'd want to have every way possible for them to stay and keep our small community feel like that. And I could be wrong, but it seems like a tax in this direction might not get us there, and also it'll be passed on to consumers regardless, which is why I was looking at a zero there. I guess I need to explain why I'm always in the red. So
Great. Okay. This one, Aaron, did you want to say something?
So this is just looking at the overall makeup. So the data we have from the state on sales is broken down by business sector group. So it doesn't tell you these are remote sales versus in-person sales. They tell you what sector. So in looking at those different sectors, one of the larger sectors is retail sector, and that has 38% of the total sectors are in that retail category. So in that retail category, there's both the items that are delivered on site versus what you would buy in the local stores. So it's going to be something less than the 38-40% that would be your home-based.
Yep. Okay, thanks. That's good. Any other discussion about the economic development components? Scott, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just if I may, I appreciate what Christine is raising, and I think we're all excited about the prospect of what Town Center is going to bring. I think in terms of one of the components of what the task force report will hopefully say is, here are the things that you need to do if nothing else changes. And I think as Town Center starts to build out and we start to get a better sense of what those revenues are going to look like, I think then council has the opportunity to use the report and say, maybe we can push the decision a year or two, or maybe we can scale back those decisions. So it's not to leave Town Center out of, because it's an important piece of what is happening. I think it's trying to figure out right now, because I'll use the economist term, which I absolutely hate because this never happens, but holding everything else constant, that's we're looking at a snapshot in time and trying to come up with strategies to reach a certain point. And at the end of the day, this is always going to be a dynamic conversation as we move forward. And the beauty of Steve's team in building our forecasting model is, as we know more, we can input those into the model and update. And so every year, council will have the opportunity to review as part of our budget to say, what are the things that need to happen? Do we still need to do them, or do we need to do less of them? And so I just want to, I appreciate, Christine, what you're pointing out, and I don't want to discount it at all. I think we're just at the moment trying to say, to Steve's point, what do we know for sure, and when that might come on board, and when it might start generating, let's say, sales tax from retail. I don't have a good sense, to be honest, about what year that might start coming in. So it's a little bit hard to look at the model and say, we know for sure in year X, we're going to start to see sales tax an increase of Y. And I think that's where we're, being a little bit conservative, I grant you, but also I think we need to know that we have a path forward. And then if things are better than that, fantastic. So just want to be respectful of that because it is a good point.
I think we have two more and then maybe we can take a break. I'm not sure if we're, okay, if we need that. So, okay, Sam, go ahead.
Okay, the next strategy is service level reductions. You know, in the memo and as we reflected in the Excel spreadsheet, you know, we looked at a 10% reduction across the board, which would be $4.2 million. This of there, and maybe this will be part of the discussion, but service level reductions can be in any range, right? But of course, thinking about what does that mean? What are service level reductions, right? That's fewer people providing the level of service that you all are accustomed to and desire. At any rate, there were 4 folks here who would not pursue reductions at all, and then a range from other folks. So I would like to open this one up for discussion as well.
Any reflections?
I can start it. It was,
Okay, and then Christine.
oh, Christine, go ahead.
No, Debbie first and Christine.
So, you know, the comment was made when we kind of walked through these at a prior meeting that if we're going to ask for tax increases of any kind, we have to demonstrate to the public that we're already doing everything we can to save money as a city. And so that's what motivated me to say this should be on the table, because there's no way we have saved everything we possibly could. At least I would like to see an evaluation of that acknowledged and what things have been done already for the city to save as much as it can.
Christine.
I think for this area, I didn't have enough information in terms of really understanding what had already been done to versus what still could be done. I think looking at the region and King County, looking at, growth, I had some concerns around service reductions based on there's not reductions going on in anybody's lifestyles or way of living. But I do think it always is good to see, is there anything we can sharpen the pencil on? I just didn't feel I had enough to really say like, yes, let's do it without those other concerns. Yeah.
Got it. Yep. Michael, Owen, Julie.
I timed this out to say, there was a timing issue by 2028 getting to 13, and then this was like the last 5 million-ish, right? And I thought this would buy us some time from now until 2033 when that next hits to either maintain costs as they are, hold stable on that and do improvements from now until then. That would be a way to ease in there. You could do things like, I bet you just manage attrition but then you'd have to just get better at what you do. And I'm in Debbie's camp around if this is all on the revenue side, I'm not sure if that speaks to our city's values once again. And again, I put this as a time thing out so that we could start now. And private business has to do this all the time. All the time. No one is able to just continually increase prices and then not become more efficient. In fact, everybody is doing more efficient activities. And I think it would behoove us to encourage the city to do the same.
Is there any more detail about what type of reductions would take place? I mean, 10% is pretty random, so.
Random.
When you do budgeting, we say, okay.
There would have to be a lot of decisions that would be made in terms of what are the service levels, what are the prioritization of those service levels, all that different aspect would have to come into it. And it's basically Scott and his team that would need to make some recommendations to the council. We didn't want to say in the strategies that, oh yeah, you should reduce blah, blah, blah. That really requires, I think, the city to have a holistic look about what are the services it's providing and where does it think that it can do that. So, and it didn't necessarily, it was just to give an illustrative example about, to get to $4.2 million, you would have to, cut 10% of non-public safety services. So in other words, take police out, take fire out, everything else that the city does, including parks, would be part of that whole equation about how to get there. And then it would be up to Scott and his team to make some determinations as to how to get there. So.
Well, earlier we talked about how everyone loves our park system. So if you reduce 10% of your effort there, then maybe there'll be more trash, maybe there'll be more brushes in the trails that we have. And so people may say, oh, there's a degradation in my park system. I see that. That's part of the 10%, but that's just one aspect. And that's a tiny part. Now you have 100 other things that you're cutting back 10%. I'm just trying to understand, what kind of life impact that would be if we're doing 10% reduction and across the board type of things.
Right.
It may not mean much to some folks, but other people say, no, that's a change in my lifestyle. I won't go for that.
Yeah. Julie, it looks like Nancy and then Dawn.
Okay, so like budgeting and forecasting is an art, right? So not a science. And I put 1 because I thought, I think it's important, like to Debbie's point, that the city do everything it can if it's going to raise taxes, to also say that it's looked at all the line items in the budget. I just thought 4.2 seemed high to me. And was there a way I would consider reductions, but maybe at a lower level? And I couldn't get the spreadsheet to work for whatever reason, like the cell was locked or something. I couldn't get it to work to get the number to see how that would affect my number. But I do think it's important, to Debbie's point, that the city be able to say that they've taken a hard look at the numbers. And, where, to Michael's point, like phasing that in over time or holding back on hires or, people that leave, you don't fill that position or things like that. And that's all part of the whole exercise. I get it. But
Right.
that's why I chose 1. I do think it's important though. It's only because I couldn't get the spreadsheet to work.
That sucks. Nancy, then Dawn.
Didn't we have some slides earlier that showed we were already operating at really efficient levels compared to cities of similar size and diversity and economic and social comparables like Mercer Island, Kirkland, Issaquah? Didn't you have some of those numbers for us already that you showed us?
We had some information in the report about per capita expenditures on different areas, and to see how we were lined up. And frankly, Sammamish's expenditures, when you strip out and make them comparable, because some agencies provide police and others don't. Some provide fire and some others don't. When you make them comparable, Sammamish had the lowest, I think the lowest expenditures per capita, if I'm not mistaken.
That's what I recall. We were way, way, way low.
Yeah, that's right.
So we were already pretty tight ship here.
Yeah,
Right?
and what drives that? The unavailability of resources to be able to do additional services, right? In some regards. Go ahead, Don.
Well, I was a little confused. The general fund per year is, at what level is it? Is it 60 million?
In total.
In total. So I wasn't sure why you exclude the safety programs, police and fire, because there is a possibility of savings there too, as I mentioned the last time.
Yeah, there is. And so in the report, we identified some changes that could happen with police. And so that was a separate strategy that you all reflected on. And then we also reflected on, well, see, for fire is lumpy. In order to reduce services there, you pretty much have to brown out a station to make that happen. And we just didn't, in our view and in our discussions with fire folks as well as city staff, we didn't think that would be a realistic scenario to assume that you could just assume that we want to reduce our services, East Side Fire, so make that happen. The power of negotiations, the power of other opportunities to be able to regionalize or to get a separate fire district, perhaps. I mean, all those different types of concepts are there, but we try to figure out, okay, what are the tools that the city of Sammamish has to be able to make change in those areas. So
Just a point, we have browned out one of our stations.
Yes. Right. And so the
Mhm.
question is, can you really brown out more?
No,
And
but
still
you can
provide
change
the
your,
level of
you change
service.
the type of service.
Say again?
You can change the type of service from fire to better response on emergency.
Yeah. And that
So
would need to
it
be
should
done.
be looked into.
Yeah. Other, John?
So Sammamish is a fairly young city, hasn't, yeah, we've been around over 20 years, but it really hasn't had a chance to get real bloated as an old city like, say, Chicago. Not a good comparison. And so to Nancy's point and the evaluation you've done, the city has been running pretty lean. So any cuts, reductions are going to translate directly into service cuts. And unfortunately, Parks is probably the most exposed of all of those. You know, you could take away maybe some administrative staff. But now you're starting to whittle around the edges. Phone calls won't get returned as quickly. You know, the pothole won't get fixed as quickly. So it's as part of this entire package of educating our constituents, our neighbors, helping everyone understand what the city can and can't do, and what these changes, what will happen if we have to make those cuts, reductions. That has to be part of the package. So I'm not real wild about the idea of doing a lot of cuts, but at the same time, to Debbie and others' points, this, and you know, Scott and Aaron and every city staff person knows this, they've got to do what they can. You had a line item in the template for joint procurement. I don't know if that's going to show up here tonight or not, but you know, staff do need to find ways to become more efficient and control costs. But it's really hard to measure all of those pinkies and fingernails of savings.
Yeah. And, you know, yeah. Any other, Rich? And then we got one more strategy before we take a break.
As Mike and Debbie were saying, you know, with the real business, you know, a lot of times a business will tell her, you know, the management will say, oh, we need to cut by 10% or whatever. And you just make it work and through efficiencies and stuff like that. And I know, you know, from a lot of talk here, it sounds like, you know, the city seems to be pretty efficient, but probably to sell this whole thing to the, you know, all the residents and stuff, it might be good to have some real, I'll say some real money that it shows that we're saving or whatever. You know, certainly there's, you know, Scott has a lot of, all his folks do a lot of work every day, but there's probably some efficiencies that could be driven out of that, you know, and maybe not necessarily lay off folks, but just everybody become more efficient or whatever, you know. It'd be good to set a good example anyway, if we're raising taxes by a bunch.
Yeah. Okay. One more strategy and we'll take a break. The group. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, so this was the levy lid lift for a special purpose. And this could raise anywhere from 1.8 to $5.4 million, depending on what the special purpose was and how high of a increase in the property tax there was. Not a lot of support for this. As you can tell, this was the lowest rated among this group. Though some comments, you know, and Julie indicating perhaps safety as a special purpose. Thoughts, comments on this one?
Julie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just in favor of tying things to the benefit people are going to see. And so if it, I put this one high, if we had to, depending on where we fell, like if we had to make a special purpose that it would be for something like police fire that people, that's, it's required and they would be willing to pay for that.
John, sorry.
Yeah, my problem with the special purpose levy is it would have to be renewed and you become dependent on it. What is it, the King County fingerprint levy
Right.
that has to get passed? There's a couple public safety levies. It's just painful every 6 years. You've got to go back and hope that you can keep it going. Otherwise, the bottom falls out.
Yeah. Can we find cities getting into the place where we need it renewed? If you can get the original one done, we need it renewed, people. And then, well, for what? Well, are you really going to cut? Even with that first levy, are you really going to move forward with cutting something if it doesn't pass? And so it's not that it can't be done. It's just that there's definitely a lift, and I think that was reflective of your perspectives on that. Perhaps any other comments about this one? Okay, I want to take a break. It's 7:57 according to my clock. How long do you need? 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes? 8:05. 8:05. Okay, so that's like 7 minutes. So okay. 8:05 p.m. I know. When facilitating team building exercises, we usually call people back. If you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. Aaron, you're so good. Mike, do we have my other team members still out there? Okay, good. Great. So we're gonna go through and look at the other strategies that that were identified that really had a low ranking, and we're just going to look at them in total and then see maybe if you have any, just thoughts about any of them individually instead of going through some of the details, because we wanted to see if we can try to coalesce to some of those that seem to have a little bit more favorability amongst y'all as opposed to those that are like zeros. So Sam, you want to go through that? You have to unmute yourself though.
You'd think I'd have figured that out by now. These will be, again, as Steve mentioned, those ranked
Share.
rated lower than
Have you shared screen?
one.
There we go. Sorry, we got it now. Sorry.
So, and I'm not going to share these individually, but rather, as a group, because these seem to not have any consensus whatsoever. But the elimination of vacant law officer positions, a general purpose tax levy, the voter approved TBD, transportation benefit district, GO bonds, which wouldn't reduce the burden on the general fund, but would allow for increased capital expenditures, the business and occupation tax, a reduction of officers instead of just not filling vacant positions. And then something that I know warms my heart and Steve's as well is that you all agree that taking no action is not a viable strategy. Any reflection on any of these?
Is it possible to tax professional services? I mean, we have so many orthodontists and dentists and, you know what I mean? It just seems like there's, we've been talking about retail sales, but this is another, oh, I see some smiles.
That's where B&O tax starts kicking in, but the question is how much
So that's,
can you really?
that's not, I think that's really regressive because it taxes sales, it doesn't tax profits. It's not fair. Yeah, it's not fair.
No. Any other points on this? Want to talk about the thing, what did we miss? What are some of the other additional strategies that you all have thought about or maybe have even included? And I think, Sam, you even, I don't know if we have the spreadsheet available to at least refer to in terms of some of the other ideas that had come up.
Yeah, so I did capture the other ideas that were mentioned, and one we heard already, the joint procurement. And I know that we had originally looked into that, and I think upon second look and further discussion with folks at the city came to the conclusion that they are doing quite a bit of joint procurement already, and that any additional joint procurement wouldn't have a great impact. There was a suggestion about pursuing additional government and private grants and additional grant opportunities. I think for Steve and I and Jessica, one reason we did not pursue that as a strategy is, when we think about the budget strategies to resolve the ongoing fiscal gap, we think about those ongoing revenues, and grants are generally one time, though oftentimes you can continue to get them, but not something that we would consider ongoing revenue that can be counted on. And then lastly, and we had a conversation about this already, but the impact and additional potential revenues from the town center and potential more dense development and revenue impact from that. Any thoughts on those or additional ideas?
Debbie?
I just want to add one. I didn't put it at the end of mine, but I mentioned it in a comment somewhere, and that is to renegotiate the YMCA agreement so that the city is receiving some profit off of that instead of not, basically we spent our reserves on that project. And I don't know, at the time, I thought that that arrangement and agreement was that we would somehow recover that spent reserve through the profits to be made on the Y. And my understanding is that I don't know what we're getting from it, but it isn't enough to recover our lost reserves. So we could, even $1 million a year, in 25 years, we'd have gotten our 25 million back. So I don't know what the status is of that, but I think we should look at it.
Okay. Don?
Well, I was here when we negotiated that whole project, and we had a lot of people wanted a municipal swimming pool. And every city that had one said, oh, you don't want to get into that business. The YMCA said, we would guarantee you no negative cost on an ongoing basis for a municipal aquatic center. And we expanded it to more than just an aquatic center, and it became the largest YMCA run facility in the greater Seattle area. And they were guaranteeing the downside. And yes, there was a lot of discussion on the council before the pandemic, because indeed the Y was thriving. Money was going into the greater Y of King County. And we recognized that when we built it, that we're an affluent community. The Y gives grants to people that can't afford to pay it. If you have a Y down in, well, say down by SeaTac, you give a lot of grants for people. And so, yes, our community was feeding into the greater Y, which will give grants in other facilities. But to take the risk off the community for ongoing maintenance was one of the reasons we cut it that way. And as it turns out, when the pandemic came and they had to shut down, the objections about the Y making too much money kind of disappeared.
Okay. Other ideas, strategies that need to be considered by the group? Rich?
Well, this is on this list. Why wouldn't we want to eliminate the 2 vacant law enforcement officers that we're not really that we haven't hired anyway? Seemed like we'd save money right there. I think I put that as a 3, and then the general purpose tax levy would, I mean, there was different versions on how much we'd raise the property taxes, but it seemed like that would be a good way to raise some money too. And every property owner and probably every renter and everybody in the city would feel a little bit of, share the pain type thing too. I would think that would be a good alternative to do it, but I'd be interested in what other folks, why they graded that so low, I guess.
Yeah, Michael?
Yeah, I guess it's a clarification on the law enforcement. I voted to fill the positions because I heard in our discussion around you're making up for it in overtime and covering bases like that. And I also know when you run people on overtime, you're going to get personal fatigue and delay, and that's not what I'd want from my law enforcement. So in my private practice, I've had times when we've just run ourselves on a steady diet of overtime, and it just never went well. But I can only speak to your point, Rich, on the police. That's why I.
And are either reflections of that or other strategies or other discussions or reflections on what you have seen on the screen? Go ahead.
So again, on the bond or a levy, it's a Band-Aid, short-term fix. and also has to go to the voters. So it would have to be very specific, attractive parks and open space bond, something like that, in order to get it floated out there. So I wouldn't put that out as a permanent budget patch.
Okay, Nancy?
And isn't it more the same of what we're trying to mitigate away from, which is the heavy reliance on property tax? Here we go again, another.
The other, Christine?
I can't recall. Are there any capital expenses that come out of the general fund or out of the budget as we're reviewing it today?
Jessica, you have the model up, right? Can you look at that? I don't think that we had an ongoing general fund capital expenditure line other than like, maybe there's like capital equipment, a mower, a blower, that type of stuff. But do you have that, Jessica?
I believe, Steve, we're at 1.4 million a year out of the general fund for capital, and that's, like you mentioned, equipment replacement, street rehab, that kind of stuff. It's not new capital. It's not additional capital maintenance beyond the street repair and the equipment
Yeah,
replacement.
that's correct, Sam.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, $1 million placeholder for CIP fund transfers, and then 350,000 that grows for related equipment. 400,000, sorry, yeah. Any other thoughts, questions? Do we need to address the Paul Stickney email and/or discussion about any of that? Go ahead, Don.
Well, I think if you look at the numbers, he's proposing a way of solving the whole problem here. In addition, the capital issue, and certainly it's not our purview to make a decision on that. It's the council's, but we could point out at least to the council that, hey, if you want to tell the citizens, we're going to increase your taxes by 30%, or we're not going to increase your tax, but we're going to increase the town center. So you might have a larger heart and soul to the city, and your taxes will remain the same. Perhaps you'll get some buy-in on it. So I think it's worthy of this committee to at least make a mention of the public comment and the numbers, sending it forward to the council.
Owen, go ahead.
Christine earlier mentioned that we had maybe about 400 units, living units being built in the town center. Is that the right magnitude?
I'll take that one for Christine.
I'm sorry, I didn't know who
Yeah,
to address that. Okay.
That's totally fine. So bear in mind that that's what's in the pipeline right at the moment, but the STCA owns 70% of the 240 acres in town center, and they have plans to build out all of their properties at some point in time. I think it's a question of when and how, in what order does it get built out. But these are the first two projects in the door, are the single family homes and townhomes. And then the next phase is the 350 overall units along with commercial. So we were making the distinction about what we actually have in hand, if you will. We have defined permits where the applicant, in this case STCA, has already come in to say, here's what we're specifically intending on building. But there's a lot more to go in that town center area.
So that's the 400, 350, 400 level in terms of units.
For just that second
For that
permit,
phase.
yeah.
And to address that person's email, where it would solve all our problems, the assumption was we have 8,000 units. So very different magnitude in terms of implementing and collecting. So is that feasible? Just throwing it out there, 8,000 units in whatever town center dimensions there are.
I will pivot more to say that we've been given a growth target cap by King County of 2,100 units overall over the next 20 years. I think it's 20 years.
Mhm.
So we couldn't do, we're not supposed to plan for that much. We're not supposed to accommodate that much additional housing. We're supposed to be planning for overall 2,100 units across the whole city, not
Mhm.
just in town center. So in some measure, we are capped by countywide planning policies that say we can't do that. And I understand where Paul's coming from, but we also have the realities of what we're being told that we have to plan for countywide. Because what they don't want to do is they don't want to have us take a whole bunch more growth that's supposed to go in places
Somewhere else.
somewhere else.
Mhm.
And so could town center accommodate more dense development? Sure, it'd be going higher. And that's a consideration. But right now, we're talking about, and the permit that's in the door right now is talking about what's called 5/1, which is 5 stories of stacked housing over retail. So those are pretty tall buildings as it is. They're taller than you think until you're standing right in front of them. So I think in terms of, for the community overall, I think that's a conversation that, council is having right now as part of the comprehensive planning process around where does that housing get allocated?
Mhm.
And then based on that, then can it accommodate that growth?
Okay, so my takeaway is the 8,000 units that Paul was suggesting, that's not a solution. I'm also hearing maybe 2,100 units might work. So that means an additional 1,700 units in the town center. Is that a potential solution? And if so, what's the dollar impact for that? That must be sizable.
Well,
Now, not only ongoing, but also the one-time tax collection, right?
And again, I want to be clear about this. It's 2,100 units across the entire city. So I think I will say, I think it's unlikely that the council is going to want to designate all of that growth in town center at the moment. In addition, just to complicate matters, the town center zoning at the moment can't accommodate that level of housing development. We would have to go in and actually change the zoning in town center to accommodate an increase, which is, it's just that it's not a quick process. It can't be done. It just can't be done tomorrow or the next day. That's a minimum year process, if not longer, just to change the zoning to then try to accommodate something. So my only point in that is that when we're talking about these things, council's making decisions right now as part of the comp plan process. And obviously, Paul Stickney and others are commenting with great regularity as part of the process, and as well they should, to try to figure out how and where development goes in the future, or where we plan for it to go. Whether or not it shows up, that's a different story. That's what the market has to dictate, but it's about what we allow. So for town center, it's unlikely, I would say, that we would take the additional 1,700 units and say they're only going to go in town center.
But it'll still be throughout the city then.
Right.
So we'll still reap the tax collections on those 1,700 units. Doesn't matter it's town center or somewhere else.
Sure.
So is that still in our time horizon to capture that revenue
Well, again, so
within our budgeting?
yeah. So again,
forecast?
I will just say this. We plan for, and by that I mean we zone and make it so that you can do denser development in certain places to accommodate higher density. Whether or not it gets built is totally market driven. What we do know is we have a property owner in town center that is planning to build out to their capacity, I believe, at the moment for what the zoning allows for. But just because we plan for high rises or denser development in other areas doesn't mean that it will actually appear. So it's a little bit more challenging to say just because you accommodate 2,100 new units that you're going to get 2,100 new units. at least not in a 10-year horizon. So much of this is the market really dictates these things. If we get a economic downturn, it's going to slow that kind of development dramatically. So there's a
Well,
lot of factors involved. in that.
Has your team or the city council thought about, well, what if that was achievable? The 1,700 units, whatever the market values are, what's the dollar impact? Because maybe that would help towards our goal here. If it's only 5%, and maybe not, but if it turns out to be more like 25, 30% of what our targets are, then that's something we should investigate further. As opposed to, well, it's going to have to jump 10 hurdles. Well, instead of thinking here are 10 hurdles to get there, why not think that's a potential solution? Let's put some more brain cells behind and see if that's viable. Is that something?
I very much appreciate your point, Owen. And here's where I would say, when we look at these things, and this is why we were saying we were conservative with our town center estimates, is it's applications in the door is what really drives whether or not we can say we know something with certainty that something is going to be built. When we're talking about upzoning someplace, that's pretty low on the can we count on it scale in terms of saying, are we going to count on something as a viable future revenue?
And if I may, I'm sorry, the left-brained guy in me is coming out here, the left-brained analytic. Let's say we were talking 2,100 units, 1,700 units, I kind of locked in on that. 1,700 units, and let's really go out there and assume that those would be built and create an assessed valuation per unit of $1 million, which is probably way out there, especially when you're talking about high density, right? But let's just, for that, $1 million, 98 cents per thousand, that equates to 1.6 million per year in ongoing property tax revenues. Is it important? Absolutely. Does it solve the gap? No. In my independent opinion, no, it does not. It contributes to it, yes, but I'm hearing that if we built 8,000 units, that we'd be able to solve this gap. And I still, even at those numbers, it doesn't solve the complete gap that we're talking about here. Now, if you add retail on there, and again, a typical restaurant is going to yield the city sales tax component, not total sales tax, but the city sales tax component will be anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 a year. $10,000 to $50,000 a year is what a really good restaurant, perhaps, even a chain fast food restaurant, could yield to the city. How many of those fast food restaurants does it take to crack this nut? It's quite a bit. So anyway, I just in terms of being able to solve that, when I see that, I would need to understand a little bit more about what the assumptions are that on an ongoing, predictable annual basis, something like that is going to solve this gap entirely and take care of itself. And I just don't see that.
Don't more people also mean more costs, more expense? I mean, more people driving on the roads, more permits and more staff to take care of the building inspections more. So it's not like it's a free lunch. We get this money and there's no cost involved.
Yeah, I mean, 8,000 units, density of 2.5 people per, I mean, that's 20,000 population increase that you'd have here. I mean, you would need more police. You would need probably another fire station, and you would need definitely another, definitely a lot more amenities on an ongoing basis. Yeah, that's not even included in that. So,
Steve, so what we're talking about with land use, by the way, Owen, if you want to come to a really scintillating meeting, come to a planning commission meeting where we're talking about all of this stuff. Guaranteed to put you to sleep. We're talking 20+ year time horizon for the construction of these new planned units. And as Scott mentioned, it's all market driven, so we don't even know if they're going to get built. But what is in the spreadsheet scenarios is not all of the increases hit at once. So as I said earlier, this is going to get revisited every year and adjusted. So let's say there is 250,000 of unanticipated new revenue from new homes. Well, that gets plugged into the model and something else gets adjusted. So this isn't concrete. It's really mush, and it's going to get mushed along as we go forward.
So we need to coalesce. Sam?
Time to build some consensus on the strategies now that we've heard from all of you reflecting on the work that you all did. I thought this has been a really wonderful discussion. So now can we get to, a task force consensus around strategies that will move the needle? I'm gonna put up the next slide that is going to show all of those strategies that were rated 1 or higher, and the estimated revenue that they would generate to help drive this discussion. But can this task force get to 3 or 4 consensus strategies that you would be comfortable recommending to Scott? And I see Michael's got his hand up, I think from the back of your head, right?
Yeah, I guess when I look at this, I've never found a strategy, a cafeteria style strategy never works. What I mean by that is that you all pick numbers and we get to the number and then there's regression to the mean, and then nobody kind of, like everybody gets a little bit of what they want. When in fact, I think if we think through, because I do this with my clients all the time, I say, well, let's think of a strategy that will bring you forward. Like, what are you talking about? And so let me give you an example. I thought, all right, you guys asked us to look at the values and live out, those truths of the city, which I thought was great. So for me, what I did is I said, I'm not going to put any temporary solutions in there because we'll just be back at this. I'm also not going to put things in there where the city council has to incrementally put things forward, because then I think we've just kicked the can down the road again when we can decide now. I think I'm very business positive. I just think that not big box wise, but in our community, my wife always says, why aren't there more restaurants in Sammamish that we can, we're always going to the same places. Anyways, and I miss Ace Hardware. So business positive. I don't want anything temporary. I want an easy message. So when it is a 1,000 paper cuts, I think that's really hard to explain to people. So that was part of my thinking. I did think impact and changeability for what you guys were talking about, like things that are really hard and hard to change versus we could do it. And then finally, a balance between expense and revenue. And what I was looking at was an 80-20 split, to where you had 80% on the tax side and 20% on the cut side, if you will, the services. And then I thought, okay, so what we have to solve is the 13 million up front and 5 million in 2033, 2028, 2033. And so I said, if I do 4B, 13 and 15 to lay it out, you're at 22 and a half. And to me, it none of that's temporary. I very business positive. I think it meets our values, but I guess that's just my view. And it was a balance of cuts and increases. And I truly didn't understand the email from Paul enough to comment on that. I wasn't sure what that recommendation was, because I didn't see the dollars behind it. I didn't know enough about it to make sense of it. So I put that out there as a strategy. And I guess if someone else has a a package strategy like that that goes to what we need to have happen, I think we can adjust that. What I don't want to do is say, oh, and that's with the 25% reserve that I don't agree with. But I'm okay with that. I'll live with that. I always think that you should budget better rather than having more padding. It's just how I've run businesses. That being said, I think those numbers, the 15 or the 13 and the 5, the 18, whatever had the 25% reserve, I think. So I got over that.
So,
Is
so
that
for those
right?
that didn't have the workbook memorized, that is utility tax targeting about $11 million. It's the MPD that would target about $5 million. And then it would be any level of service level reductions that would be required to fix the gap. Is that basically
Yeah,
where you're
because I
coming from?
was like 2 million over on that. You don't even have to do the 10% of the last one,
Yeah.
and you could phase that in between 2028 and 2033. And then I trust, my city government to, be responsible with those things and not be dependent upon a vote to pull that off. So, okay. I yield.
The senator from North Sammamish yields his time. Anybody? What are your thoughts on it? Go ahead, Don.
Well, I pretty much agree with what Michael's saying. I would only go back to the voters with one thing, and that's the Metropolitan Park District. So I wouldn't want to go back in any other voting. So as far as the Transportation Benefit District, I wanted to start at the $20. I'm supportive of the Gulf tax. The service reductions, whatever it takes to make up the difference. So you have the utility tax, I would have that closer to 10 million, I think, because I didn't want the double taxation on the waste, whether you do the franchise fee or the utility tax. So, and as far as the reserves are concerned, I think differently. The property tax is very stable income. You know it's coming in, and it comes in two sections. So you'll have your minimum reserve, say in March, right before the property tax start coming in. And I would feel comfortable with a 5% reserve in March. So that's where I would have the reserve at.
Okay. Michael, you
Yeah,
want to?
I would just add, to clarify, Don, did you say the park district? Yeah, I agree. I was saying that too. And then I know that's a vote, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's fine. But I guess one of the significant views I took is that once I hit that level, I don't have to keep adding more to this. Because that just means we become a bank, and I don't see taxing the residents so that we bank money.
What? Just to throw it out there, because some other agencies have done this. What if those ideas that created additional fiscal capacity could be used to address the unfunded or underfunded capital obligations, whether it be through initial, bonds that would have now a dedicated source to be able to pay it for, or an ongoing transfer to help deal with some of those?
Yeah, I mean, I went back to our assignments and I asked early on, are we messing with capital? And you guys said no. So I didn't even think about it. Now, if you want to up that number more than 18.5 to cover the capital, then that's a different problem to solve. And I can go back to the drawing board.
Other reflections, what straw designs here? Julie, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think the reserve is important, just because I think some of the things, we just came out of a unprecedented pandemic and no one knew what was gonna happen there. The wildfires Scott mentioned as like a potential, and then we've just seen what could happen on Maui. The earthquake, that we're all kind of waiting for. I feel like reserves are important for the city to have, because we just you don't know what you don't know. And, there's a whole host of things. So I would, that's why I'm supporting the higher reserves. I also agree with only going to the voters with one thing. And the council doing as much as they can. So yeah, that's what I prefer.
John has his hand up. Go ahead.
So I really like Michael's strategy. So if you could capture that, go back and look at the tape, I guess. It made a lot of sense.
Sam, you got all that right.
I did well, and so I think Larry and Mike, that I would be curious, or John, I'm sorry. Is there anyone that would be opposed to Michael's suggestion of the utility use of a scenario recommendation that includes the utility users tax at the $10-11 million and the Metropolitan Parks District, and pairing that with some service cuts? Is there anybody opposed to that combination of strategies?
Nancy looks like she's grabbing the mic and is Dawn.
When would a Metropolitan Parks District go to the voters? And what would happen if it failed?
I think timing is negotiable, Nancy, and I think, and I don't know if I'm getting out ahead of my skis here, Stephen. You can stop me, and we've toyed with the model, and if a utility user's tax at the 6% level and that brings in $11 million is implemented relatively early, and so by that I mean 2026 2027 time frame, then you would not have to go back to the voters to ask them to approve an MPD. And hopefully I get these numbers right, and Jessica can correct me if I'm wrong, but you wouldn't have to go back to the voters for that until sometime around 2030.
But can we, Sam, let's have Jessica bring the model up so that we can just kind of play with these a little bit and understand what the impacts are, if that's okay with everybody, just to understand what this straw design might look like.
All right, so what I'm going to add into the model now is the $10 million utility tax starting in 2028. The Metropolitan Park District starting in 2030. And then about $1 million in service level.
Was it $1 million or two, Michael? Were you saying two?
I was just, those first two I was taking in their entirety, and I wasn't sure about we didn't have the curve drawn out, so I didn't know how soon we'd have to do that, but I was assuming immediately. I don't know why we'd stop. But the other one, it was just to make up the delta. So when I did 4.2, it brought me to 20 and a half, and we didn't have to go that far. I think it was 18 and a half, if I have it right. Yeah. And so whatever it took to make up that delta is what I was after, because I don't think it's just, I think these across the board, because I've done this in corporate too, across the board, 10% cuts, it's just doesn't make any sense. I think Scott and company are much smarter than that, than to say 10%. And so I think we can put in a dollar value here, but I think these guys are wise enough to know where there's flex in some places where you can't. You just have one person, and you can't have a half a person. So
I just want to reflect that look at your spidey sense here, because if you look at that second graph about the operating surplus or deficit, you'd need 2 million by 2034 to be able to address it.
Again, to Julie's point, that's the 25% reserve, right? Which I'm not going to fall in that.
Well, so the two different
right?
things. Firstly is, what was the reserve level? I'm sorry, Jessica, you're probably going to say this, but what is the reserve level that we're trying to manage? And that's what the top graph is. That's the difference between the green line versus the blue line.
Yep.
And then the second graph is, what is the operating surplus From our perspective, there's two things that you want to address. Number one is you want to maintain reserves at the appropriate level of reserve, at the appropriate level. And then secondly, you want to make sure that you eradicate the deficit throughout the timeframe.
What you're showing there, Steve, is that by doing what is highlighted there, we have averted the insolvency, right?
Right, correct.
I wouldn't say insolvency, but we've
the
averted
crossover.
the depletion of
The
reserves.
zero, yeah, sorry about that. I hope that wasn't recorded because that sounds that sounds disastrous. Yeah, that sounds, don't let that get out. The crossover.
Jessica, it's interesting that I mean, reserves that are kind of growing, right? I mean,
Yeah, and with that growing reserves, that build capacity to fund additional capital projects, either through spending that reserves or through debt service. And so we have built into this model that you can actually play around with that. And you can see what that capacity to fund additional capital projects would be. So we can look at that as well. So if we're assuming an annual capital investment of $5 million starting in 2027, we can see that will look like, and that would actually bring us below that target reserve amount. But if we maybe decrease that to,
minus.
thank you. We decrease that to 3 million, you see that we're investing 3 million annually in capital while maintaining reserves right at that target level.
So what
If
you
you
see is the top graph shows you that, you know, can you turn it back on again, Jessica? I just want to show that difference.
Yeah.
So the red line is where your reserves will actually, where the city's reserves would actually end up. The green line that you see above it in that yellow space there shows that additional fiscal capacity being expended towards your capital needs. So.
And just to understand this, what is in there, and I guess this is Sam and Jessica running the model, all that is, none of those are temporary, right? Those are all, they're not the levies, and this is all cash we can count on.
Yes, that's
Right.
that's
Yeah, in fact, what you're seeing here is implementing realizing the full revenues of the utility users tax in 2028, going to the voters for the MPD in 2030, and phasing in $2 million of service reductions over a 3-year period beginning in 2027, and then starting the investment in capital, the $3 million investment in capital in 2027. And, you know, as I mentioned, you could buy more time, if you will, by implementing the utility users tax earlier than 2028. There's only so early you can do that, right? Because there's going to be a number of things the city's going to have to do to administratively to get there. But, you know, by 2027 or 2026 even, that gives you more runway and more distance between, you know, council implementing a UUT and then going out to the voters to ask them to approve an MPD. And so, Jessica, you could model that and show an earlier start time for the UUT.
Yeah.
Is there any reason, like from Scott, from your standpoint, I was thinking if you can start it now, start it. Is there any reason why you wouldn't want to start doing some of the stuff now?
Those are good questions. So your reasons would be everything that you might think that they would be if the current council is not prepared to take that action right at the moment. I mean, those are realistic. However, one of the pieces that I want to point out is that right now, this is starting earlier. So everything that we have in fund balance right now is allocated towards making sure that we're using it all in essence. With the exception of the reserve, everything else is being allocated to making sure that we don't get to a point where we drop under. However, that means between now and whenever that point is, that means we're not spending any dollars out of the general fund reserve to do capital. So this is the piece why we hounded Steve and the team a little bit about saying, okay, this is great. What happens if there is capacity to address capital? Because we either smooth this out and wait until 2028, or we start earlier, to your point, Michael, and you create the ability to use some existing reserve to start doing some of the capital pieces that we know are there. So those are, it's trade-offs.
And got it. And is there pressure to not do that? Because Steve was talking about the unfunded commitments is.
Yeah, I mean, their task was to show how we solve the gap at when we run out of reserve, right? That was the starting premise. So the task was, can we sort that out? Now, if the task force says, to your point, why wouldn't you start earlier so that you can try to do these things? Then that's something that if it's a consensus recommendation, I think we would take that for sure to council.
Yeah, for, I
Julie
think
and
for,
Don- Go ahead, I'm sorry.
yeah, I was just going to add that, for any capital funding and any transfers out of the general fund for capital, you would really want to wait to do that until you knew you had the revenue streams to cover it. To Scott's point of, right now that doesn't exist. And so to backfill the current deficit, it's all coming out of the reserves.
That's not how our family works.
Don, then Julie.
To that scenario, I would add the Gulf fees and the economic development strategies, and that's $1 million a year, which could reduce the service cuts.
Forgive my partially faulty hearing, which is getting better, but say that again, Don, you would.
The Gulf fees is 500,000 a year.
Got it, okay.
Economic development strategies, you estimated at 500,000 a year.
Okay, got
I
it.
would add those two in.
I feel the population will be growing. And if we're thinking we're going to add, that's just a one-time $1 million cut in staff or in costs or ongoing.
Yeah.
That's painful. It's really painful.
It's reducing the base budget in essence.
Yeah.
So then your starting point moving forward every year is whatever we would lower it down to. That's the starting point.
That's painful, especially with the city growing. There's gonna be more demand for services. I would agree with Dawn that we need to add some more revenue or bump something up here with. I'm not sure I would support the economic development strategies, but certainly I agree with Michael. We should get it all over at once. We can't keep dripping. We need to have a one time or a couple of times. What would it be? I can't read it. It's too small for me.
And Nancy, yeah, I'm sure we've been all in the situations in our careers where we've had to cut that, and it is painful. I just don't know how much. I just think though, if it was all on the tax side and zero on anything else, I worry about the goodwill and the explanation. Not that never happens that way. I mean, but that would just be my limited opinion.
Julie.
So a couple things. So one of the things we also had was the transportation benefit district for $20. That's $1 million. That was one that we had talked about that was high on the list. So I might recommend that. And then my other question was about like risk. I remember reading in the document that the utility tax could be subject to referendum.
That's correct.
Yeah, so what is the risk? I mean, that has to go to referendum, or, that doesn't pass at that level, or I'm just trying to assess what that risk could be, or do we know what that is?
Hmm.
It's a tough, I know it's a tough one, but that's, I mean,
well,
that's our big number.
It is, yeah. And depending on, so some councils decide that they're just going to go ahead and take it to referendum. In other words, just pass it to a vote and just get it over with. Others will say, no, let's go ahead and implement it. And then if there is a groundswell of people that are opposed to it, they go through the process of doing the referendum, which is that you have to sign a petition and it has to be validated, and goes that whole process to ultimately get it onto the ballot to determine whether it should be overturned. What is the risk? Y'all live here, you have a better idea of this than I do in terms of whether there could be, if something moved forward like this, a groundswell of people within the community, of which there would be more than 50% of the voters to say, we don't want this. So I don't, I mean, is there a risk? Yes.
If they're going to take that risk.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just going to add really briefly onto that. I think in no small part, the risk is higher if you don't go through a process of explaining why you need it, which is one of the reasons that we are going through this exercise now, is so that there is a clear understanding that we've gone and demonstrated that there is a need and why. And to me, that's a critical piece about being transparent with the community, to say, we're not just doing this because we want to, there's valid reasons behind it. Here's the report, here's what the task force did, so that it lowers that risk.
Both Don and John yet again raise their hands at the same time. I'll let you guys duke it out.
Well, just briefly, I think the risk is pretty low in the sense that most cities are at the 6% level on utility tax already. And as Scott said, we have good arguments for it. We're so strongly based on property tax. If we add another leg to the stool, and it is a leg which is somewhat discretionary, I think the argument can be made very well.
Go ahead, John.
So going back to Michael's strategy, which I totally support, but I think for the $2 million in proposed cuts, we should also forward to the council recommendation of other options. Now, if council doesn't want to cut services or cut that deeply into the general fund, we could suggest the TBD, the admissions and ED sort of smorgasbord to council to make up that $2 million. So you have, okay, our recommendation is the 80-20, but if you don't want to take the 20, then here's our secondary non-voted alternatives.
Yeah, I guess I just, once again, we're back to, we could just take a dartboard at this thing, because I want this to have some explanation, but if it's a little of this, a little of that, a little of this, explaining this to people will be more difficult. I mean, I think the fewer choices we make that are extremely rational and targeted, the more effective. I guess my thought of the task was to give them a recommendation, not a set of options. Because if that's the case, then they could have done that, I guess. You know, we are like, if you don't like this, how about this? If you don't like this, how about this? We could have 30 of those of all different flavors. And I think our answer is really our combined thinking says this is the recommendation we stand in.
Well, how about the higher utility tax?
Say that again, Nancy.
Higher utility tax, aren't we taking the middle one?
Yeah. So the
11.
11.7 million,
Right.
which would be 6%, well, again, 6% for everything except for water, wastewater, stormwater, and solid waste, which would be 7%.
So that simplifies it.
Yeah, it,
Mhm.
yeah, I just think the more simple, the more simple approach we take, I think the better off. But if we, the feedback I got from friends and family is that, wow, if you're gonna nickel and dime these things everywhere, it's almost like you're hiding things and like, I get my Comcast bill, it's got this little thing in there. I get my Sammamish water thing, it's like, oh my God, 1,000 paper cuts versus, all right, here's a problem. We're gonna do this, and it's a permanent solution.
So I want to do a quick time check. I know we're at 9 o'clock, but I think we're at a really good spot. So I want to keep the conversation going. And you know, I think I am hearing some consensus around Michael's suggestion, and what Jessica here is showing is that higher utility users tax option 11.7, but we could back it back down to 11, implementing it in 2026, so relatively soon, right? Not going to the voters to an MPD for an MPD until 2031, which provides, and I like to think of all of that space above the target reserve line, all of that space above the green line, as opportunity for capital investment more than banking money, right? And this gets you there. So,
and Sam, that was that had no cuts in the.
oh, that's right.
Well, 1 million, 2 million in cuts. Is that what you're saying, Michael?
Well, I was saying it more, and maybe this is wrong, team, but I was just thinking more optics. If we do 0 on that front. Now, I say that not having seen you guys gave tons of information on the labor budgets. I don't know what else was in there. So I'm speaking out of lack of detail. But I think if this is put forward to where we don't do any belt tightening ourselves, like 0, I'm not a fan of those optics. I mean, you could even say a couple 100,000. I don't know.
Yes,
I don't
that's
know.
and Michael, you must be in Jessica's head because she just added half a million in cuts
There you go.
in
And
2027. Yeah.
yeah, and over time too. I mean,
Mhm.
you could use attrition to deal with that, or a lot of strategies to do that.
The other component is that does the city lead with that and saying that let's do some cuts. We're going to commit to right sizing the ship as much as we possibly can without participation from you, the community. So, is it $1 million over the next 3 years or something like that as you are gearing up and demonstrating?
And some of those, I'm just talking those as some of the fixed costs. If you have variable costs because you've increased one of these things that demands more administration to take care of it, I'm assuming that you kind of roll that into the program. But if it is because some of those choices pull along those labor costs with it, but I'm talking about some of the fixed costs, if you can adjust those.
Yeah, just for giggles and kicks, model that for $1 million, Jessica, starting in 2025 over 3 years. Go ahead, Rich, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was thinking we probably should leave it at least at $1 million. I mean, the city budget is what, 30 million a year or something, and it looks kind of wimpy if we're only saying.
Yeah,
we can
general fund
save.
60 million, and the non-public safety component of that is 40 million.
Yeah. I mean, if we're showing some goodwill, we need to have, something like $1 million at least there.
And even if the language was $1 million over 3 years, I don't think that's smoke and mirrors. It's just still is I think an respectable overture of intent.
Another part of this go ahead, Debbie, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to point out, we're still looking at 3 more years or 2 more years of deficit spending. So, the city is, I think we can demonstrate the need, to cut expenses in the short run because of that. And then I like your suggestion as well. I just think it's simple and clean. And I know that everyone in this room is going to work on the park vote So that,
Yeah.
yeah, you have just now formed the park committee.
I think it's good to show the definite spending because that's why we're here. You want to show that, and then our objectives are here, the 1, 2, and then some overhead costs, whatever it is, cost savings, service level reduction, whatnot. But you have to show that to demonstrate the urgency of this task force and what the city, what the council has to do. So this is the first story you want to tell. Not so great, but we can improve it. And here are the things we want to do.
Don?
Well, I would support this simplified solution with the paragraph afterwards saying that the task force also had high on their list, the Gulf fees, the economic development strategy and transportation benefit district, because those were the next highest ones on the list.
I think we also need to demonstrate to the public that the city is already operating in a very lean manner. And if we have those numbers that show how we rank with other comparable cities and show that to people, there maybe, you know, that they're going to feel that we really are, you know, trying harder. So, I mean, you might feel other cities are bloated, but our people are working really hard. And I think we're going to have a lot of turnover unless we provide city support. I mean, it's very difficult, as you all, if you run a business, you know, how difficult it is to find employees now and how people will leave for the greener pastures. And our city's already been through a lot of turnover. We really want to keep staff and keep staff happy. So.
Larry?
I'll follow up on what Nancy said. I want to make sure that it's understood. We really need to care for and about the city's infrastructure, i.e. the staff. That's important because to get some of this work done that the task force gives to the city council, that the staff will end up doing it. So let's maintain that. Talk about capital improvements or cost over the years. Transit and transportation are going to be important and probably costly. So out of that 11.7, that can be spent on transportation, highways and
Council will have complete
sidewalks.
discretion over how they wanted to use those
Okay.
funds. And in fact, my other question here is that based on what you're seeing on the screen here, the city's reserves would be expected to grow. So does part of this recommendation also include perhaps that, you know, the city should consider as these revenues are realized, investing that in underfunded and unfunded capital improvement needs? And, you know, in fact, one of the other things that we did, and Jessica, you were just doing that annual capital investment piece, right? To keep it, you know, to draw it down, if you will. The other piece that we ended up doing was if the city wanted to get it done today or soon, how much could you issue in debt to be able to get some of that done today, knowing you have an ongoing revenue stream for the future? And so we did some modeling down there where if you did a debt issuance of $70 million, assuming an interest rate of 4% in this crazy interest market, we have to see how things are going. Let's just use that for now. 20 years, that would be about $5 million, very simple debt service that would be needed. And if you added that to it, you see again, it gives the council or the city $70 million starting in 2027 to be able to start investing in capital improvements.
I guess I would push back a little on that because we're above the 25%, and I was impressed where you're not carrying any debt now. I wouldn't want to put that at jeopardy.
So instead, just start pairing it out as you need it for the next few years. So instead of debt today, maybe the $5 million per year to invest in.
And I say that without, I didn't read in detail what are the unfunded and anticipated project. I don't know what those are exactly. So I don't know if I'm shooting myself in my own foot because my neighborhood's gonna go down a sinkhole.
No, I appreciate that, Michael. Thank you. really quickly, the one thing that is hanging out there that we know about is the remodel of Fire Station 83 to bring it up to code. And that's I'm gonna guesstimate by the time we get to costing it out, it's gonna be in the $12 million range. And that's just one piece. And we are doing a full facilities capital needs assessment right now to understand, just off the top of my head, when we took over, I think I mentioned this in meeting number 2, when we took over the doing the street lights that we own and the traffic signals, we now have we need a lay down yard for those poles. We need a place to store the equipment like the cherry picker. So we need another maintenance yard that we don't currently own, as well as building it out. Those are just 2 upfront items before we do the rest of the assessment. So we know we have capital needs that are unfunded at the moment.
Got it. And can it be done must it be done with debt or is that too risky
Well,
to not, because I like not carrying debt, but
yeah, I mean, it's a question ultimately of who actually pays. And by that, I mean, using debt service as a way to have both people that are here now and people that move in down the road sort of equitably pay their share of the investment. And so and with debt service, you get a year over year set dollar amount that, rather than saying, oh, well, if we get more in, then we can save up and do that thing. But if the cost comes in higher, now we've, which that never happens. So anyway, it's an approach. It's a strategy and an approach.
The problem with raising the debt is that now you have to have it open to the voters, right? No, not at all.
Sorry, Steve could answer this, but we have a certain amount of what's called councilmanic debt, which council can float bonds up to a certain amount. And then if you go beyond that, then you have to go to a vote for, you have a certain amount of debt capacity the city has. Kind of like if you go try to get a home loan, they'll tell you you can get up to this much, same essential.
So whoever the lender would be would look at your projection and say, yes, you have the capacity out here. Then they will commit to lending you the dollars
Yeah, they go
today.
on the bond market, they
Right,
would
bond.
sell bonds, yeah.
Yeah.
So your forecast has to be great then.
The other debt tool would be like tranche financing, which a lot of you would understand, and that's just getting some short-term loans. Maybe it's a 3 or 5 year loan to just be able to give you some capital today. And so the interest rates on that are a little bit different and would still give you the capacity. I want to call the question here in a moment. Nancy, you just grab the mic.
Yeah, do we have any more big road projects in the offing? Like, so okay, so Holly Way comes to mind, right? Is that the one I'm thinking of? Is that, yeah, okay.
It's one of many.
4 lanes.
Yeah,
But
that's going to be, I mean.
well, so I mean, again, this is right now, in general, the transportation capital improvement plan has not been funded through the general fund. In the same way that parks investments are not funded through the general fund, they have their own funding sources. Now, the amount of dollars that we have coming into the transportation capital fund on a year over year basis are pretty small. So at some point in here, there has to be a collective community decision on how do we fund some of these bigger projects that we've identified that need to happen. So there's, like I said, nothing's free and nothing's easy, and it's just competing priorities is the name of the game always.
So let me ask us, based on the straw design, which includes $11 million of utility tax revenues in 2026-ish timeframe, Metropolitan Park District that would yield $5 million by 2031, $1 million in service or in expenditure reductions that the city would start implementing in fiscal 2025 over a 3-year period. And with the capacity to be able to invest in the capital needs for this community to the tune of about $5 million per year, whether that's by some debt financing or whether it's just by annual transfers or just an overall management of that. With that being the straw design, I'd like to get your perspectives on that, and I want to use thumbs. A thumbs up meaning, yes, I'm for this, and I believe that this is a recommendation that we as the FST need to make. A thumb down means that, no, I have some significant reservations about this and I can't necessarily get behind it right now, and we're going to find out why. Or a thumb sideways. Maybe it's like, I get where you're coming from. I'm kind of there. I'm not quite fully there, but at least I believe I've been heard, and I've been understood with some of my reservations. So with that, I'd like to have you all identify whether you're a thumbs up on this, you're a thumb sideways, or you're a thumb down on this straw design. Thumbs? Side. Yep. So we have 3 sideways. Is there any discussion that you want to have about that? But I'm seeing that you're yes, but Debbie, go ahead. And then
I
Rich
just
and
want to
then-
clarify, it's not that I'm not supportive of the proposal. I want to have a conversation with at some point about the messaging. I'm not totally sold on all the messaging conversation we've had, but the ultimate result I support.
Got it. Thank you for that, Debbie. Don and Rich, you both, if you wanted to respond to the sideways.
Just briefly, the utility tax, when we talked about the stormwater, and I'm concerned about putting the tax on the stormwater, which would cut it back from 11 million to something a little bit less. And I did want to have mentioned in the transmittal the next 3 items that we were pretty strong on.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So would that be a friendly amendment to the rest of you that voted yes, in terms of just saying that there are potentially some other strategies that could be, if for some reason these were not realized? Is that a good way to frame it, Don?
And if that was the case, would we reconvene and talk about those, or what would happen? Because if you just put them in a paragraph, I'm not sure what would happen.
Well, the way I was framing it is that these are the strategies that we recommend that the city pursue and start developing an implementation plan to do that. And to the extent that we find that either they're infeasible or they're not raising the revenues that are required, that we also identified 3 other strategies that we feel could also be pursued if these primary ones are not realized.
I did understand that then. So those are options that they could pull the trigger on. And what were the other 3?
So the 3 were TBD, Econ Dev, and the golf
fees.
Okay.
Well, the economic development, again, I don't think that's very business positive. I'm a golfer, but I can live with that. It's not that big deal. And then the transportation is the other one, right?
TBD at the $20 level. Is that what you were saying, Don? Right,
Yeah.
the lower level?
Okay.
With that as a friendly amendment. Oh,
I was gonna
Scott,
say
do you want to say
that
something?
Rich
For
was-
Oh, I'm sorry, Rich. Yeah, I apologize.
Let's see. So Don was proposing maybe to take out the water runoff. Stormwater, yeah. I'd agree with that. Yeah, I think that's a good thing. I don't know if everybody else agrees. Also, the $1 million cuts, is that $1 million a year, or is it 333,000?
So it
a
would
year?
be
Or what's that? What is that?
333,000 in the first year, another 300 in the second year, another 300 in the third year. That's cumulative, meaning that we're
So there's a
lowering
little
our
bit,
expenditures.
so there's a little bit of real cuts.
Until we
that-
get to
that-
$1
that we
million.
can
Yes,
say that
the real
that
real
the city's
reductions.
doing. Okay.
Just curiously enough, that those dollar amounts is about equitable to the 1% increase in the property tax.
As it just happens to. So with those as friendly amendments, everybody understand it? Where are your thumbs? For those in other parts of the country, we have everybody's thumb being up. So good job, y'all. So questions about next steps then? Do we need another meeting on the 24th to wrap this up? Or do you want us to put together kind of a summary of what your recommendations are? We can draft it and then send that around, and maybe we do a very quick Zoom check-in or something like that on the 24th, or do we need more time in the room on the 24th?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think there's more decisions. I'm with Debbie in terms of, I think we all agree we have to be very cautious about communication. Obviously, you guys know this. And because it's, pretty fragile. But if it is just packaging and reviewing, I don't think we have to get together for decisions. Is that what you're asking? It's just a review of what packaging this all together. Review.
Packaging the recommendation to the
Yeah.
city manager.
Yeah, good. I think we ought to see that.
As if he wasn't in this room, but let's see.
And then who will handle the packaging of the presentation to the citizens? I mean, how are we gonna? Somebody's gonna have to do a good job here.
Well, so right now we have slated, and hopefully at least some of you can attend on September 19th. Presenting to your recommendations to me technically, but it would be to present your deliberation and report to the council to get to Debbie and Michael's point, to give the context about the conversation that was had and how you got to where you got. And so we would be appreciative if some measure of you were willing to come and be part of that presentation that night.
I think it would be really great if someone on the task force, instead of the consultant, made some sort of the consultant made some sort of this is what we have come up with talk. And I think I would nominate Michael. He's so well spoken. I think that would be a really.
I would be glad to throw any of you under the bus during that meeting. But I think us being there is important. Physically, I think us being there as a body is so. I assume that's what we were all going to do anyways. But if there's any role that we can play, I think everybody in here has expertise on a lot of these things that we can speak to. And I would say if you guys could craft it in a way to pull us in, I think that'd be really powerful.
It'd be spoken word poetry. I think we would have, a role for those, whoever can make it. And then we would have Steve available to talk about the back end process, if you will, and if there's questions about the model or anything else, as a collective group, if you will.
I apologize. I have been texting Jessica and Sam, and I'll tell you what, all three of us are really pumped on your behalf of the work that you did tonight. And as Sam so eloquently put, he says, I don't think I'm going to get any sleep tonight because I'm just so pumped and jacked about what you guys were able to do tonight. Yeah. Anybody have a quick checkout that you want to do in terms of our leaving here? Go ahead, Owen.
Yes, kudos to Sam and Jessica for developing all the tools for us to use. That really helps us get our thinking together, to share it quickly, and to make changes on the fly here. That really helped. That probably saved us meetings galore, and we accomplished it in the last half hour. So thank you very much, folks.
Woo-hoo. Any other final closing thoughts as we adjourn?
Pleasure to meet everybody. This has been a really positive experience.
I want to take a quick moment, and I will do this in front of council as well, but I really cannot thank all of you enough for stepping up and joining us and giving up your summer evenings and to do the actual work and the analysis of, we've dumped a lot of material on you. Really can't thank you all enough for doing that. We really appreciate it. And I think, moving forward, I think this is a great model for us when we come up with thorny issues to go out to the community and say, what do you think? Here's the problem. Do you agree? And so I really appreciate everyone giving up your time and coming forward and being part of this process, because I think it's critically important for our future. So thank you.
With that, we'll see you on September 19th, y'all.
Great job, everyone. Have a great night.
Jessica, Sam, thank you guys.
Thank you both.
You
Try to
got
get some sleep tonight. See y'all later.
Good night.